Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the key turned in the lock with a rusty groan, as if the house itself was protesting my intrusion. I pushed open the door, wincing at the loud creak that echoed through the silent neighborhood. The porch light flickered weakly behind me, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I hesitated on the threshold, my hand still on the doorknob. "Come on, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "It's just a house. Your house now." But it didn't feel like my house. It felt like I was trespassing, even though Grandma Rose had left it to me in her will. The thought of her made my throat tighten. It had been 2 weeks since the funeral, but the pain was still raw. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of disuse. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I flicked it, nothing happened. "Great," I sighed. "Just great." I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the entryway. Everything was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood visits. The faded wallpaper with its pattern of roses, the ancient coat rack that looked like it might topple over at any moment, and the small table where Grandma always kept her keys and mail. As I moved further into the house, my light caught something that made me pause. On the wall to my right hung a series of photographs, their frames dulled with age. I stepped closer, my free hand reaching out to touch one. It was a picture of me and Grandma Rose taken on my 10th birthday. I was grinning widely, showing off a missing front tooth, while Grandma stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders. She was smiling too, but there was something in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. A sadness or maybe a secret. "What were you hiding, Grandma?" I whispered, running my fingers over the dusty glass. The house seemed to shift around me, as if responding to my voice. I jerked my hand back, my heart suddenly racing. "It's just settling," I told myself. "Old houses make noise all the time." I continued down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare runner. Family photos lined the walls, chronicling generations of my family. I paused at each one, recognizing faces I knew and wondering about those I didn't. As I neared the end of the hall, I came to a photo that made me stop short. It was of my mother, looking young and carefree. She was laughing at something off camera, her hair wild in the wind. I felt a pang in my chest. Mom had died when I was just a baby, and I had no memories of her. All I had were these frozen moments in time and the stories Grandma Rose used to tell. "I wish you were here, Mom," I said softly. "I could use your help right about now." The floorboards creaked behind me, and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. The beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the empty hallway. "Hello?" I called out, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. "Is someone there?" Silence was my only answer. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. "Get it together, Sarah. You're letting your imagination run wild." I turned back to continue down the hall, but something made me glance back at my mother's photo. For a split second, I could have sworn her eyes had moved, following me. I blinked, and the illusion was gone. Shaking my head, I made my way to Grandma's bedroom. The door was closed, and I hesitated before turning the knob. This was it, the reason I'd come back to this house. Grandma had told me, in those final lucid moments before she passed, that there was something important in her room, something she needed me to find. The door swung open with a soft whisper of wood on carpet. I stepped inside, and immediately, I was enveloped in Grandma's scent, lavender and vanilla, with an undercurrent of something earthy and ancient. It brought tears to my eyes. "Oh, Grandma," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I swept my light around the room. It was just as I remembered. The big 4-poster bed with its patchwork quilt, the vanity cluttered with old perfume bottles and jewelry boxes, the rocking chair by the window where Grandma used to sit and knit. I moved to the vanity first, figuring it was the most likely place for Grandma to have hidden something important. I rifled through drawers full of old letters, faded photographs, and tangled necklaces. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or particularly significant. Frustrated, I straightened up and caught sight of myself in the mirror. For a moment, in the dim light of my phone, I looked eerily like my grandmother. I leaned closer, studying my reflection. We had the same high cheekbones, the same slightly crooked nose. But my eyes were different, wider, more afraid. "What am I supposed to find, Grandma?" I asked my reflection. "What were you trying to tell me?" And then, as if in answer to my question, it happened. A soft, tinkling melody began to play, so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it, but it grew louder, filling the room with its haunting tune. I knew that melody. It was the lullaby Grandma used to sing to me when I was little, the one she said had been passed down through generations of our family. But where was it coming from? My eyes darted around the room, finally landing on the source, an old music box on the nightstand. It was open, its tiny ballerina spinning slowly. "That's impossible," I breathed. I hadn't touched the music box. I hadn't even been near it. So how had it started playing on its own? With shaking hands, I approached the nightstand. The melody grew louder with each step, until it seemed to fill the entire house. As I reached out to close the box, a chill ran down my spine. The air around me suddenly felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And then I felt it, a presence beside me, as real and solid as if someone was standing there. But when I turned, there was nothing but empty air. "Grandma?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the lullaby. "Is that you?" The music box snapped shut with a loud click, plunging the room into silence. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a long moment, I stood there, frozen in place, straining to hear any sound in the oppressive quiet. But there was nothing. No creaks, no whispers, not even the sound of the wind outside. Just as I was about to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A soft, familiar voice singing the lullaby. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee." I clapped my hands over my ears, but the voice continued, growing louder and more insistent. All through the night. "Stop it!" I cried out, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real, this can't be real." But even as I said it, I knew in my heart that it was. Something had awakened in this house. Something old and powerful and not entirely benevolent. And whatever it was calling to me. As the last notes of the lullaby faded away, I opened my eyes. The room looked exactly the same, but it felt different. Charged. Alive. I backed toward the door, my eyes never leaving the music box. As my hand found the doorknob, I heard one last whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Welcome home, Sarah." I turned and fled, slamming the bedroom door behind me. But even as I ran down the hallway, I knew the truth. There would be no escaping whatever had begun here tonight. This was only the beginning. My feet pounded against the hardwood floor as I raced down the hallway, the haunting melody of the lullaby pursuing me like a relentless ghost. Each note seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the house, growing louder and more distorted with each passing second. "This isn't happening," I gasped, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "This can't be real." But the music continued, mocking my disbelief. It was everywhere, seeping through the floorboards, whispering from the walls, even seeming to emanate from the very air around me. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. I stumbled into the living room, my eyes darting wildly around for any sign of the source. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Grandma's old floral print couch, the faded rug, the ancient television set that probably hadn't worked in years. But now, in the dim light filtering through the dusty curtains, Everything seemed sinister, as if the familiar objects were mocking me with their normalcy. My gaze fell on the mantelpiece, where the cursed music box sat innocently among Grandma's collection of porcelain figurines. How had it gotten here? I was certain I'd left it in the bedroom. With trembling hands, I reached for it. The metal was ice cold to the touch, sending a shock through my system. I fumbled with the clasp, trying desperately to close it and silence the melody. Come on, I muttered, my fingers slipping on the smooth surface. But no matter how hard I tried, the lid wouldn't budge. The tiny ballerina continued to spin, her painted smile now seeming more like a sneer. "Why won't you stop?" I cried, frustration and fear making my voice crack. As if in response, the music swelled, growing so loud it was almost painful. I dropped the box, covering my ears again. It hit the hardwood floor with a thud but didn't break. Instead, it continued to play, the ballerina now spinning faster than ever. And then I felt it, a presence beside me, as tangible as a physical touch. The air grew heavy, pressing against me from all sides. Goosebumps erupted across my skin as an icy chill swept through the room. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the relentless melody. Silence answered me, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I spun around, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. There was nothing there, and yet... "Grandma?" I called out, hating how small and frightened I sounded. "Is that you?" The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath misting in the air, little puffs of white that dissipated almost as soon as they formed. It was as if all the warmth had been sucked out of the world, leaving only this bone-deep cold that seemed to reach into my very soul. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering violently. "What's happening?" The lullaby changed then, subtly at first. The melody remained the same, but there was something off about it now. The notes seemed to twist and distort, becoming something dark and menacing. It no longer sounded like the sweet song Grandma used to sing to me. Now it was a discordant, nightmarish version that set my teeth on edge. And then, barely audible beneath the music, I heard it, a voice, whispering my name. "Sarah." I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound brave despite the terror coursing through my veins. "Sarah, my sweet girl." The voice was familiar, and yet not. It sounded like Grandma, but wrong. Distorted, like the music. There was an undercurrent of something dark and hungry in that voice that made me want to run and never look back. "You're not my grandmother," I said, my voice shaking. "My grandmother is dead." A low chuckle echoed through the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Oh, Sarah, death is just the beginning." The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, stretching and writhing like living things. They crept across the floor towards me, reaching out with inky tendrils. I backed away, my eyes wide with horror. "Stay away from me!" But the shadows continued their advance, and with them came the cold, a bone-deep chill that seemed to freeze the very marrow in my bones. I could feel it creeping up my legs, numbing my feet and making it hard to move. In a panic, I turned and ran for the door. But as I reached for the handle, it began to change before my eyes. The wood warped and twisted, the metal of the doorknob melting away like ice in the sun. "No!" I cried, pounding my fists against the solid surface that had once been a door. "Let me out." Behind me, the voice laughed again, a cruel, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "There's no escape, Sarah. You're mine now." I spun around, pressing my back against the wall. The shadows had coalesced into a vaguely human shape, tall and imposing. 2 points of light glowed where eyes should be, fixing me with a stare that seemed to pierce right through me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The shadow figure moved closer, its form rippling like smoke in the wind. "I want what was promised to me," it hissed. "What your grandmother swore would be mine." I shook my head, confusion mingling with my fear. "I don't understand. Grandma never promised you anything." "Oh, but she did." The voice purred, now sounding so much like Grandma that it made my heart ache. She promised me you, Sarah, her most precious treasure. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications sank in. No, I said, shaking my head violently. You're lying. Grandma would never do that. But even as I denied it, a part of me wondered. I remembered the sadness I'd seen in Grandma's eyes in that old photograph, the secrets I'd always sensed she was keeping. What if this thing was telling the truth? The shadow moved closer still, its cold presence enveloping me. I could feel it seeping into my skin, trying to take hold of me from the inside out. Fight it all you want, the voice whispered, now right next to my ear. But you belong to me now, just as your grandmother did before you. With a surge of desperate energy, I pushed away from the wall, ducking under the shadow's reaching arms. I ran blindly, not knowing where I was going, only knowing I had to get away. I found myself back in Grandma's bedroom, the music box still playing its twisted melody on the nightstand. Without thinking, I grabbed it, intending to smash it against the wall. But as soon as my fingers touched the cold metal, a jolt of energy surged through me. The room spun, and for a moment I saw something. Flashes of memory that weren't my own. Grandma, young and frightened, making a deal with a shadow. The same lullaby sung over a cradle. My mother, her eyes wide with terror as she clutched a baby, me, to her chest. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping and disoriented. The music box slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. And then, with a final discordant note, the music stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood there, my chest heaving, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But there was nothing. No whispers, no moving shadows, no bone-chilling cold. Just the quiet tick of the old clock on the wall and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Had it all been in my imagination? A hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion? I turned slowly, half expecting to see the shadow figure looming behind me. But the room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun streaming through the window. Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. I stumbled to the bed, sinking down onto the familiar patchwork quilt. It wasn't real, I told myself, running a shaking hand through my hair. It couldn't have been real. But as I sat there trying to calm my racing heart, my eyes fell on the music box lying on the floor. And there, etched into the bottom in spidery script I had never noticed before, were words that made my blood run cold. The price must be paid. I stared at the inscription, a sense of dread settling over me like a shroud. Whatever had happened here tonight, whatever force had been awakened, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that it was far from over. The night stretched on endlessly, each tick of the bedside clock a reminder of my sleeplessness. I tossed and turned, tangling myself in Grandma's old quilt, but rest eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, that haunting lullaby would start up again, playing on an endless loop in my mind. Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night. I groaned, pressing my pillow over my head. Stop, please just stop, I muttered into the darkness. But the melody persisted, sometimes fading to a whisper, other times swelling until it seemed to fill the entire room. As the night wore on, I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. When the first pale light of dawn finally crept through the curtains, I gave up on sleep altogether. Exhausted and on edge, I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards under my feet. I made my way to the kitchen, desperately in need of coffee, but stopped short in the doorway. Something was wrong. My eyes darted to the old clock on the wall, the one that had hung there since before I was born. Its hands were frozen at 3:33 a.m. That's odd, I murmured, reaching up to adjust it. But as I touched the clock face, a chill ran through me. The glass was ice cold, as if it had been sitting in a freezer. Uneasy, I moved to the microwave, then to the stove. Each display showed the same time, 3:33 a.m. "This isn't possible," I whispered, my heart beginning to race. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery, or something else. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a familiar scent wafted through the air. The sweet, comforting smell of Grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies. For a moment, just a moment, I forgot everything else. That smell transported me back to countless childhood afternoons spent in this very kitchen, watching Grandma work her magic at the oven. "Grandma," I called out, half expecting to see her bustling around the corner with a plate of freshly baked cookies. But the kitchen remained empty, and as I approached the oven, I realized it was stone cold. No cookies, no warmth, nothing that could explain that tantalizing aroma. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "Pull yourself together, Sarah," I muttered. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But when I opened my eyes, the smell was still there, stronger than ever. And now, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of humming coming from somewhere in the house. Grandma's voice, singing that damned lullaby. "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "No. This isn't real. You're sleep-deprived and stressed. That's all this is." Desperate for a distraction, I decided to tackle the task I'd been putting off. Sorting through Grandma's belongings, there had to be some rational explanation for everything that had happened, and maybe I'd find it among her things. I started in the living room, methodically going through drawers and cabinets. Old photographs, knickknacks, bills, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. By midday, I'd worked my way up to the second floor. As I passed the attic door, a sudden gust of wind rattled through the house, making me jump. And then, barely audible over the whistle of the wind, I heard it again, that soft, eerie humming, coming from the attic. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run from this house and never return. But I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. The attic door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. Dust motes danced in the beam of sunlight that filtered through the single, grimy window. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone up there?" Silence answered me, but as I climbed the stairs, that feeling of being watched intensified. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The attic was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, all covered in a thick layer of dust. But one thing stood out, an old trunk, its leather cracked with age, sitting in a pool of sunlight as if waiting for me. As I approached it, the humming started up again, so close now it seemed to vibrate through my bones. My fingers brushed against the trunk's surface, and suddenly, unbidden, the latch sprang open. Inside, nestled among old clothes and trinkets, was a stack of leather-bound journals. With shaking hands, I lifted out the topmost book. It fell open to a page covered in Grandma's familiar handwriting, but the words I read chilled me to my core. "The bargain has been struck. God forgive me, but I had no choice. They promised to spare Sarah, to keep her safe. But at what cost? The lullaby calls to me now day and night. I fear what I've set in motion." "Oh, Grandma," I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. "What did you do?" I spent the rest of the afternoon poring over the journals, each entry more disturbing than the last. They spoke of ancient pacts of powers beyond human understanding, of a price that had to be paid in each generation, and my name, appearing again and again. Sarah, the last in the line, the final payment. As I read, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the attic. But these shadows, they seemed to move of their own accord, stretching and twisting in ways that defied natural law. I scrambled to my feet, the journal clutched to my chest. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. The shadows writhed, reaching out with inky tendrils. And from everywhere and nowhere I heard a voice. Not Grandma's this time, but something older, darker. "The time has come, Sarah," it hissed. "The debt must be paid." I backed away, my heart pounding. "What debt? I don't owe you anything." The voice laughed, a sound like crushed glass. "Oh, but you do. Your grandmother made sure of that. And now, you're the last. The final payment." The shadows lunged for me and I let out a scream, stumbling backwards. I fell down the attic stairs, tumbling head over heels until I hit the landing with a thud that knocked the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping for breath. When I finally managed to sit up, the attic door was closed and the house was silent once more. But clutched in my hand was the journal, its pages open to an entry I hadn't seen before. In shaky handwriting, as if written in great distress, were the words, "The lullaby is the key. It opens the door, but it can also close it. Sarah, if you're reading this, you must finish what I started. Sing the lullaby at midnight when the veil is thinnest. It's the only way to end this." I stared at the words, my mind reeling. The lullaby, the very thing that had been haunting me, was the solution. As if on cue, the ghostly melody began to play again, soft and insistent. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a glimmer of hope. Tonight at midnight I would face whatever lurked in the shadows of this house. I would sing the lullaby, and I would end this nightmare once and for all. As night fell and the shadows grew longer, I steeled myself for what was to come. Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. With trembling hands, I opened the first of Grandma's journals. The leather cover was worn smooth with age, and the pages crackled as I turned them. The scent of old paper and ink filled my nostrils, mingling with the musty air of the attic. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered. "Let's see what secrets you've been keeping." The first few entries were mundane, recipes, gardening tips, and daily observations. But as I delved deeper, the tone began to change. References to the phases of the moon, strange symbols in the margins, and cryptic phrases that made little sense. Then, on a page dated nearly 50 years ago, I found it. "Today I cast my first real spell. The power coursed through me like lightning. I understand now why Mother was so insistent that I learn our family's ways. We are not like other people. We are witches, and this is our birthright." I nearly dropped the journal. Witches? Our family? It seemed impossible, and yet, hadn't I witnessed impossible things in this very house? As I read on, a picture began to emerge. Generation after generation of women in our family, all practitioners of an ancient and secret craft. The magic they wielded was powerful, but it came at a price. "The lullaby," I murmured, running my finger over a passage. "It's not just a song." Indeed, according to Grandma's writings, the lullaby was an ancient spell, passed down through our family line for centuries. It had the power to open doors between worlds, to communicate with spirits, and even to bind otherworldly entities to our will. But with each use, it exacted a toll on the singer. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I absorbed the information. The lullaby had been used by my ancestors to gain wealth, power, and knowledge beyond mortal ken. But each time, something was lost. A piece of their humanity, their soul, given over to the darkness they sought to control. As I neared the end of the journal, a loose page fell out. I picked it up, my blood running cold as I realized what it was. A list of names. Women's names, spanning back generations. Each one was crossed out, a date written beside it. And at the bottom of the list, unmarked and alone, was my name. Sarah. "What does this mean?" I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet attic. Am I next?" The house creaked ominously around me as if in answer. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for a moment, I could have sworn I heard distant whispers, too faint to make out. Pushing aside my fear, I turned back to the journals. There had to be more, had to be an explanation for all of this. The next journal seemed to pick up where the previous one left off. Grandma's handwriting had changed, become more erratic and urgent. The entity grows stronger. One entry read, "I fear I've made a terrible mistake. The lullaby was never meant to be used this way. We've upset the balance, and now it demands payment." I read on, my horror growing with each page. Grandma wrote of a dark presence that had latched onto our family, feeding off the power of the lullaby. With each generation it grew stronger, demanding more. "It wants Sarah," Grandma had written, the page stained with what looked disturbingly like teardrops. "My sweet, innocent granddaughter. I won't let it take her. I'll find a way to break this curse, even if it costs me everything." The house groaned again, louder this time. The floorboards beneath me seemed to shift and warp. It was as if the very structure of the building was trying to stop me from reading further. "No," I said firmly, gripping the journal tighter. "I need to know the truth." As if in defiance of my words, a gust of wind swept through the attic, ruffling the pages of the open journals. I heard a thud behind me and turned to see a photo album had fallen from a high shelf. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It had fallen open to a specific page, as if guided by an unseen hand. And there, staring up at me, was a photo of Grandma that made my blood run cold. It was clearly her, but wrong. Her usually warm, kind eyes were pitch black, like empty voids. Her face was contorted in an expression that was equal parts ecstasy and agony, and around her, barely visible, were shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in impossible ways. "Oh God, Grandma," I breathed. "What happened to you?" As if in answer, the whispers I'd heard earlier grew louder. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, the walls, the floor, even from inside my own head. "Sarah," they hissed. "Sarah, it's time." I slammed the photo album shut, my heart pounding. "No," I shouted. "I don't know what you are, but you can't have me." The whispers turned to laughter, cold and mocking. The shadows in the corners of the attic seemed to deepen and move, reaching out with inky tendrils. In a panic, I grabbed as many of the journals as I could carry and bolted for the attic door. As I reached for the handle, I felt an icy grip on my ankle. I looked down to see a shadow had wrapped itself around my leg. "Let go," I yelled, kicking out wildly. The shadow dissipated, but others were forming, reaching for me. I wrenched the door open and half ran, half fell down the stairs. The journals clutched tightly to my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the relative safety of the living room. Panting heavily, I dropped the journals on the coffee table and collapsed onto the couch. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to process everything I'd learned. Witchcraft, ancient spells, a malevolent entity that had latched onto our family, and me, somehow at the center of it all. "Why me?" I asked the empty room. "What makes me so special?" As if in answer, one of the journals fell open. My eyes were drawn to a passage near the bottom of the page. "Sarah is different. I sensed it from the moment she was born. She has a power within her that surpasses anything I've ever seen. If the entity gets hold of her, there's no telling what it could do. I must protect her, at any cost." I stared at the words, a mix of fear and determination welling up inside me. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted from me, I couldn't let it win. Not after everything Grandma had sacrificed to keep me safe. "Okay," I said, straightening my shoulders. "If I'm so powerful, then I'll find a way to end this. For you, Grandma. For our whole family." As night began to fall outside, casting long shadows across the room, I settled in to read. I had a lot to learn, and not much time. Whatever was coming, I needed to be ready. The lullaby began to play again, soft and insistent, but this time, I didn't try to block it out. Instead, I listened closely, trying to discern the power hidden within its notes. "I'm not afraid of you," I told the encroaching darkness. "I'm Sarah, last of the Bennett witches. and I'm going to finish what my grandmother started. As if in response, the house creaked and settled around me. But this time it didn't feel menacing. It felt expectant, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. With a deep breath, I opened the next journal and began to read. Whatever secrets it held, whatever truths it revealed, I was ready to face them. The time for running and hiding was over. The real battle was about to begin. The gentle creak of wood against wood slowly pulled me from the depths of unconsciousness. My eyes fluttered open, confusion immediately setting in as I found myself not in bed, but seated in Grandma's old rocking chair. The familiar scent of lavender and aged wood enveloped me, but it did little to calm my racing heart. "How did I get here?" I murmured, my voice hoarse as if I'd been screaming. The last thing I remembered was poring over Grandma's journals in the living room, desperately searching for answers. But now, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, indicating it was well into the next day. Had I fallen asleep reading? But that didn't explain how I'd ended up in this chair in Grandma's bedroom. I tried to stand, but my limbs felt heavy, uncooperative. It was as if I'd been drugged, my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. With effort, I managed to push myself up, swaying slightly as I got to my feet. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered, shaking my head to clear it. I stumbled towards the vanity, gripping its edge for support as I peered into the mirror. The face that looked back at me was pale with dark circles under bloodshot eyes, but as I stared, something strange began to happen. For a split second, it wasn't my face I saw reflected, but Grandma's. Her familiar features, lined with age and worry, superimposed over my own. I blinked hard, and the image was gone, but the unsettling feeling remained. "What's happening to me?" I whispered, leaning in closer to the mirror. As if in response, the lullaby began to play. But this time it wasn't coming from some external source. The haunting melody seemed to originate from inside my own head, the notes reverberating through my skull with increasing volume. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. "Stop," I pleaded, squeezing my eyes shut. "Please, just stop." But the lullaby continued, growing louder with each passing moment. The words, once comforting, now felt like a threat. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee, all through the night. Guardian angels God will send thee, all through the night." As the song reached a crescendo, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled backwards, collapsing into the rocking chair once more. The room spun around me, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the lullaby stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I sat there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was I losing my mind? Or was this all part of whatever dark force had attached itself to my family? My eyes fell on Grandma's old writing desk, and something compelled me to move towards it. As if in a trance, I seated myself at the desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. What am I doing? I wondered aloud, even as my hand began to move across the page. To my horror, the handwriting that flowed from the pen wasn't my own. It was Grandma's distinctive script, the same I'd seen in all those journals. But the words were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Symbols and phrases in a language I didn't recognize filled the page. Some looked vaguely like Latin, others like nothing I'd ever encountered. And yet, as I wrote, a part of me seemed to understand their meaning, even if my conscious mind couldn't grasp it. "A seal," I found myself muttering, though I had no idea where the words were coming from. To bind the darkness, to close the door. I tried to stop writing, to put down the pen, but my hand wouldn't obey. It was as if someone else was controlling my body, using me as a conduit for something. "Grandma?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is that you?" There was no response, just the continued scratching of pen on paper. I watched helpless as page after page filled with this strange script. Finally, after what felt like hours, my hand stilled. I stared down at the pages, covered in writing I couldn't read but somehow understood was immensely powerful and dangerous. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked the empty room. As if in answer, a gust of wind blew through the room, ruffling the papers. One sheet separated from the rest, floating to the floor at my feet. I bent to pick it up, and as I did, the words seemed to rearrange themselves before my eyes, forming a message in English. "The key is in the lullaby. Sing it at midnight, in the heart of the house. Break the cycle, Sarah. End this, once and for all." A chill ran down my spine as I read the words. This was it, the answer I'd been searching for. But could I trust it? After everything that had happened, how could I be sure this wasn't just another trick? "I need to get out of here," I said suddenly, the need to escape this house overwhelming me. "I need to think, to clear my head." I gathered up the pages, shoving them into my pocket as I made for the bedroom door. But as I reached for the handle, an invisible force slammed into me, throwing me backwards onto the bed. "No!" I cried out, struggling to my feet. "Let me go!" I tried again, only to be met with the same result. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected, keeping me trapped in the room. "You can't leave," a voice whispered, sounding both like Grandma and not like her at all. "Not until it's done." Panic rose in my chest as I realized the truth of the situation. I wasn't just being haunted anymore. I was being possessed. "Get out of my head," I shouted, pounding my fists against the invisible barrier. "This is my body, my life." The lullaby started up again, louder than ever, drowning out my protests. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the melody seemed to rewrite my very thoughts. "The seal must be completed," the voice said, using my own mouth to speak. "The cycle must be broken." I fought against it with everything I had, trying to reassert control over my own body. But the force was too strong, the weight of generations of witchcraft and dark bargains pressing down on me. As I knelt there, trapped in my own body, a terrible realization dawned on me. The journals, the lullaby, the strange writing, it had all been leading to this moment. I was the last in the line, the final piece in a puzzle that had been centuries in the making. "What happens if I complete the seal?" I managed to ask, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears. "Everything ends," came the reply, filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "The entity, the curse, all of it. But the price—" The voice trailed off, but I understood. The price would be me. My life, my future, everything I'd ever hoped for or dreamed of. "There has to be another way," I pleaded, even as I felt my body standing up, moving towards the desk once more. But deep down I knew the truth. There was no other way. This was my inheritance, my burden to bear. The sins of my ancestors, passed down through the generations, had finally come to rest on my shoulders. As night began to fall outside the window, I felt a sense of inevitability settle over me. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the moment of truth. "I'm scared," I whispered, a tear sliding down my cheek. "I know, my dear," Grandma's voice replied, softer now, more like the woman I remembered. "But you are stronger than you know. You can end this, Sarah. You can save us all." As the lullaby played on, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Whatever was coming, whatever price I had to pay, I would face it head on. For Grandma, for our family, and for myself. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, counting down the minutes to midnight, to the moment when everything would change, one way or another. As the clock struck midnight, a surge of energy coursed through my body. My limbs, once heavy and uncooperative, now moved with an eerie grace that wasn't my own. I found myself walking to the kitchen, my steps measured and purposeful. "What's happening?" I whispered, but my voice sounded distant, as if coming from somewhere else. My hands reached for the cabinet, pulling out the large container of salt Grandma always kept for cooking and other purposes, I now realized. As I carried it back to the living room, I felt like a puppet on strings, my body responding to commands I couldn't hear or understand. The furniture had been pushed to the walls, leaving a large open space in the center of the room. Without hesitation, I knelt down and began to pour the salt onto the hardwood floor. The white grains flowed from my hand in intricate patterns, forming symbols I'd seen in Grandma's journals but never fully understood. The seal of binding, I heard myself murmur, though the words held no meaning for me. To close the door between worlds. As I worked, candles placed around the room suddenly flickered to life, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air grew thick with the scent of burning wax and something else, something ancient and powerful. I continued drawing, my hand steady even as my mind raced with confusion and fear. Circles within circles, strange angular shapes and twisting lines that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The salt pattern grew more complex with each passing moment, covering nearly the entire floor. When the last symbol was complete, I stood, my eyes roving over the intricate design. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, pulsing with an energy I could feel but not see. Now, the voice that was both mine and not mine said, "We begin." My hands reached for Grandma's journal, which lay open on a nearby table. As I touched it, a jolt of electricity seemed to run through me, and suddenly, I could read the strange script that had baffled me before. Words of power spilled from my lips, a language older than time itself. With each syllable, the candles flared brighter, and the salt lines began to glow with an unearthly light. By earth and air, by fire and sea, I call the powers that used to be. By blood and bone, by flesh and soul, I seek to make our family whole. The house began to tremble, a low rumble that started in the foundations and worked its way up. Picture frames rattled on the walls, some crashing to the floor. But I couldn't stop, couldn't even pause to take a breath. The chant poured out of me, gaining strength and volume with each repetition. Wind whipped through the room, though all the windows were closed. It swirled around me, picking up loose papers and sending them flying. The candle flames danced wildly but didn't go out, protected by some unseen force. As I reached the crescendo of the chant, my voice rising to a near scream, the center of the salt pattern began to glow brightly. The light intensified, expanding outward until it formed a swirling vortex of energy. "The door is open," the voice inside me said. "Now, we must close it forever." I felt myself being pulled towards the vortex, my feet sliding across the floor despite my attempts to resist. The wind howled, drowning out my cries of fear. This was it, I realized. The price that had to be paid. My life for the sealing of the door. "I'm not ready," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "Please, I don't want to die." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. The vortex grew stronger, its pull irresistible. I was mere inches away from its swirling center when suddenly a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Sarah, stop." Everything froze. The wind died down, the vortex's pull lessened, and the candles flickered back to normal. I blinked, feeling control of my body return to me. "Mom?" I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. There, at the edge of the salt circle, stood a shimmering figure. As I watched, it solidified into the form of a woman I'd only ever seen in photographs. My mother. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. "I'm so sorry it's come to this." I stumbled back from the vortex, my legs shaking. "Mom, how are you here? You're dead?" She smiled sadly. "Yes, I am. But the veil between worlds is thin right now thanks to your ritual. I couldn't let you do this, Sarah. I couldn't let you sacrifice yourself. But Grandma's journals," I stammered. "The entity, the curse. It has to end, doesn't it?" Mom stepped closer, careful not to disturb the salt lines. "Yes, it does. But not like this. Not at the cost of your life." The vortex behind me pulsed, as if reminding us of its presence. I could feel its pull, weaker now, but still there. "I don't understand," I said. "If not me, then who? Someone has to close the door." "Someone does," Mom agreed. But it doesn't have to be you. It was never supposed to be you. She reached out, her hand stopping just short of touching me. Your grandmother, she made a terrible mistake. She thought she could control the entity, use its power, but it was too strong, too hungry. It's been feeding on our family for generations, growing stronger with each life it takes. I thought of the list of names in Grandma's journal, all crossed out except mine. So all those women sacrificed, Mom nodded. Some willingly, some not. But each death only made the entity stronger, more difficult to contain. Then how do we stop it? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. If not with this ritual, then how? Mom's form flickered for a moment, and she glanced nervously at the vortex. We don't have much time. The door won't stay open forever, and once it closes, the entity will be free to take you. She looked me in the eyes, her gaze intense. Listen carefully, Sarah. The power to end this has always been inside you. You're different from the rest of us. Special. That's why the entity wants you so badly. But I don't feel special, I protested. I don't even know how to control whatever power I'm supposed to have. You don't need to control it, Mom said. You just need to release it. The lullaby is the key, but not in the way you've been led to believe. Don't sing it to seal the door. Sing it to set yourself free. The vortex pulsed again, stronger this time. The wind began to pick up, and I could hear whispers at the edge of my hearing, angry, hungry whispers. It's coming, Mom said urgently. Sarah, you have to trust yourself. Sing the lullaby, but make it yours. Change the words, change the melody. Break the pattern that's held our family captive for so long. But I don't know how, I cried, panic rising in my chest. Mom's form was fading now, becoming more transparent by the second. You do know deep down. Trust your instincts, Sarah. Trust yourself. I believe in you. With a final, loving smile, she disappeared. In her place, dark shapes began to emerge from the vortex, reaching out with smoky tendrils. No more running, a voice hissed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. No more hiding. You're ours now, Sarah, just like all the others. I backed away, my heart pounding. The lullaby began to play again, but this time I recognized it for what it was. A cage, a trap, designed to keep me docile and compliant. But Mom was right. I wasn't like the others, and it was time to prove it. Taking a deep breath, I opened my mouth and began to sing. The melody was similar to the lullaby I'd known all my life, but different. Wilder, freer. The words came to me as if I'd always known them. No more sleeping, no more night. I claim my power. I claim my right. No more secrets, no more lies. I am the one who will arise. As I sang, something inside me awakened. Power surged through my veins, electric and alive. The dark shapes recoiled, shrieking in fury and fear. The vortex began to shrink, its pull weakening with each note I sang. The candles flared brightly, their light pushing back the encroaching darkness. I felt strong. I felt free. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely myself. As the last note faded, the vortex collapsed in on itself with a thunderous boom. The salt lines flared once brightly, then faded away. The candles guttered out, leaving me standing alone in the dark, quiet room. For a moment, all was still. Then slowly I began to laugh. It started as a giggle, then grew into a full-bodied laugh of pure relief and joy. It was over. The entity was gone, the curse broken. I had done it. As dawn broke outside, painting the room in soft golden light, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The house no longer felt oppressive or threatening. It was just a house now, filled with memories both good and bad. I walked to the window, looking out at the new day. Whatever came next, I knew I could face it. I was Sarah, last of the Bennett witches, and I was finally, truly free. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to peek through the curtains when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection in the old mirror hanging on the wall. But as I blinked and rubbed my eyes, the image became clearer, more solid. "Mom?" I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. The ghostly figure of my mother stood before me, a sad smile on her face. She looked just like she did in the photos Grandma had shown me, young, beautiful, with eyes that seemed to hold a universe of love and sorrow. "Hello, Sarah," she said, her voice echoing slightly as if coming from a great distance. "I've waited so long to talk to you." I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed right through her. A chill ran down my spine, reminding me that this wasn't real, or at least not real in the way I was used to. How is this possible?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You died when I was a baby." Mom's expression darkened. "Yes, I did. But not in the way you've been told. Sarah, there's so much you need to know, and I'm afraid we don't have much time." She glanced nervously at the shadows in the corner of the room, which seemed to writhe and twist unnaturally. "Your grandmother. She's not who you think she is. She's not who any of us thought she was." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean, Grandma loved me?" She raised me. "Oh, Sarah," Mom sighed, her form flickering slightly. "She did love you, in her own way. But that love, it was tainted by something dark and hungry, something that's been in our family for generations." She moved closer, and I could feel a slight chill in the air around her. "I died protecting you from her, Sarah, from what she wanted to do to you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, falling onto the old sofa. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That can't be true. Grandma would never hurt me." "Not hurt you exactly," Mom said, her voice gentle but firm. "Use you, the way she used all of us." She waved her hand, and suddenly the room around us changed. We were standing in Grandma's bedroom, but it looked different, newer, cleaner. I saw a younger version of Grandma standing over a crib, singing that haunting lullaby. "Watch," Mom whispered. As Grandma sang, a strange mist seemed to flow from her mouth, seeping into the crib. I stepped closer, horror growing in my chest as I realized the crib held a baby. Me. "What is she doing?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Preparing you," Mom said, her voice hard. "The lullaby isn't just a song, Sarah. It's a spell, a way to swap souls between the living and the dead." The scene shifted again. This time I saw Mom, alive, vibrant, bursting into the room. She snatched baby me from the crib, backing away from Grandma. "I won't let you do this, Mother," the younger version of my mom shouted. "Not to my daughter, not to anyone else." Grandma's face contorted with rage. "You fool," she hissed, her voice unlike anything I'd ever heard from her. "Don't you understand? This is our legacy, our power. With each new body we grow stronger. We become immortal." "It's wrong," Mom said, clutching baby me to her chest. "It's evil, and I'm ending it, right now." What happened next was a blur of motion and light. I saw Mom running, Grandma pursuing. There was a struggle at the top of the stairs, a terrible fall. I turned away, unable to watch anymore. "Stop," I pleaded. I can't see this." The visions faded, and we were back in the present-day living room. I was shaking, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Mom said, her ghostly hand hovering near my cheek. "I never wanted you to see that, but you needed to know the truth." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "So Grandma, she killed you? And she wanted to take over my body?" Mom nodded solemnly. "Her soul is trapped in this house now, unable to move on. She's been waiting all these years, growing stronger, preparing for the moment when she could complete the transfer." A terrible realization dawned on me. "The music box," I whispered. "The lullaby. All those times she sang to me." "She was laying the groundwork," Mom confirmed, "creating a connection between your soul and hers. If she had succeeded, I would have ceased to exist, I finished, feeling sick to my stomach. Mom's form flickered again, more violently this time. Sarah, listen to me. We don't have much time left. Your grandmother's spirit is gathering strength. Soon she'll make her final attempt. I stood up, wiping away my tears. What do I do? How do I stop her? The music box, Mom said urgently. It's the focal point of her power, the anchor that keeps her tied to this world. You have to destroy it. But how? I asked. I've tried to stop it from playing before, but nothing works. Mom's image was growing fainter by the second. Your power, Sarah. The power that's been in our family for generations. Grandma tried to corrupt it, to use it for her own gain. But in you, it's pure, untainted. I could barely see her now, her form little more than a shimmer in the air. Trust yourself, Sarah, her voice echoed. Believe in your own strength. You can end this. You can set us all free. Mom, wait, I cried out. Don't go, I need you. But she was gone, leaving me alone in the silent house. Or, not quite alone. I could feel it now, a presence watching me from the shadows. Waiting. Hungry. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The music box sat on the mantel, innocent looking but radiating a malevolent energy I could now sense clearly. As I approached it, the lullaby began to play. But this time, I understood its true purpose. Each note was a hook, trying to latch onto my soul and pull it out of my body. Not this time, Grandma, I muttered, reaching for the box. As my fingers touched its surface, I felt a surge of energy course through me. The lullaby grew louder, more insistent, and I could hear Grandma's voice layered beneath the melody. Yes, child, she crooned. Let go. Let me in. We can be together forever. For a moment I felt my resolve waver. Part of me, the part that still loved the grandmother I thought I knew, wanted to give in, but then I remembered my mother's sacrifice, the truth of what Grandma had done. No, I said firmly. This ends now. I focused all my will, all the power I could feel buzzing beneath my skin, into my hands. The music box began to vibrate, its melody becoming discordant and chaotic. Stop! Grandma's voice shrieked. You don't know what you're doing. But I did know. For the first time in my life, I truly knew who I was and what I was capable of. With a final surge of energy, I crushed the music box between my hands. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once. And then, silence. I opened my eyes to find the music box reduced to ashes in my palms. The oppressive energy that had filled the house was gone, replaced by a sense of peace I'd never felt before. As the first true rays of sunlight spilled into the room, I could have sworn I heard my mother's voice one last time, carried on the morning breeze. Well done, Sarah. You're free now. We all are. I smiled through my tears, finally understanding the full weight of what had happened, and the new path that lay before me. The legacy of my family, with all its darkness and light, was mine to shape now. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room. I stood there, my heart racing, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The music box, the focal point of all this madness, had been in my hands moments ago. Now it was gone. No, I whispered, my eyes darting around the room. No, 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 this can't be happening. I spun around, searching frantically for any sign of the cursed object. But the mantelpiece where it had sat for years was empty, save for a thin layer of dust. Grandma, I called out, my voice echoing in the suddenly too quiet house. Is this you? Are you still here? Silence was my only answer, but I could feel something in the air, a tension, like the calm before a storm. Whatever had happened when I crushed the music box, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for what I knew I had to do. The music box was still here somewhere in this house, and I had to find it Had to destroy it for good this time. Okay, Sarah, I muttered to myself. You can do this. Room by room. It has to be here somewhere. I started with the kitchen, figuring I'd work my way through the first floor before tackling the upstairs. But as soon as I stepped through the doorway, I knew something was terribly wrong. The familiar, cozy kitchen of my childhood was gone. In its place was a nightmarish parody. The walls oozed a thick black substance that looked disturbingly like blood. The floor tiles had become a checkerboard of gaping maws, lined with razor-sharp teeth. And there, in the center of it all, stood a figure that looked like Grandma, if Grandma had been dead for 100 years. "Sarah, dear," the thing crooned, its voice a horrifying mixture of Grandma's loving tone and something infinitely more sinister. "Come give your old Grandma a hug." I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut with all my might. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. "Not real," I gasped. "It's not real. It can't be real." But when I opened the door again, the nightmarish kitchen was still there. The Grandma thing grinned at me, stretching out arms that were far too long, fingers ending in wicked claws. "Don't be afraid, sweetie," it said. "Grandma just wants to hold you. Forever." I slammed the door again, this time turning the lock for good measure. "Okay," I said, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "So the kitchen's out. Let's try the study." But each room I entered transformed before my eyes into a horrifying dreamscape. The study became a labyrinth of towering bookshelves, each tome whispering dark secrets as I passed. The dining room was an endless table set for a feast of human flesh, with my family seated around it, their eyes empty and mouths stitched shut. And always, there was some version of Grandma. Sometimes kind and inviting, sometimes monstrous and terrifying, but always trying to lure me in, to trap me. "You can't run forever, Sarah," her voice echoed from every corner of the house. "This is your legacy, your destiny. Embrace it." I found myself in the upstairs hallway, gasping for breath. The walls here were breathing, pulsing like a giant heart. The floorboards beneath my feet had turned to quicksand, threatening to pull me under with each step. "I won't give in," I shouted, more to bolster my own courage than anything else. "This isn't real. This isn't who I am." A chilling laugh echoed through the hall. "Oh, but it is, my dear. This is who we are, who we've always been. The power, the darkness. It's in our blood." I pushed forward, fighting against the clinging floor. "No," I grunted. "Mom showed me the truth. This isn't our legacy. It's your curse, Grandma, and I'm going to end it." As I struggled down the hall, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, at the far end of the corridor, floating in midair, was the music box. It spun slowly, the haunting melody of the lullaby drifting from it. "Yes," Grandma's voice purred. "Come to me, Sarah, take up your birthright." I took a step forward, then another. The quicksand floor tried to drag me down, but I fought against it with every ounce of strength I had. "That's it," the voice encouraged. "Just a little closer. We can be together, you and I. Forever." As I got closer to the music box, I could feel its pull. Part of me, a small, scared part that longed for the simple comfort of childhood, wanted to give in, to let Grandma take over, to escape the responsibility and fear of what I'd learned. But then I remembered my mother's sacrifice. The truth of what Grandma had done, not just to her, but to generations of our family. And I knew I couldn't let it happen again. "I'm coming, Grandma," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "But not for the reasons you think." I was just a few feet away from the music box now. I could see my reflection in its polished surface, distorted and wrong. And behind that reflection, I saw Grandma's face, young and beautiful and terrible. "My darling girl," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I knew you'd understand. Together, we'll be unstoppable." I reached out, my fingers inches from the box. You're right about one thing, Grandma, I said. This ends now. With a burst of speed, I lunged forward, grabbing the music box. Immediately, I felt a searing pain in my hands, as if I were holding white-hot metal, but I didn't let go. No! Grandma's voice screamed, all pretense of kindness gone. What are you doing? Stop. The world around me began to warp and twist, reality itself seeming to tear at the seams. I saw flashes of other times, other places, generations of my family, trapped in this cycle of death and rebirth. I'm sorry, Grandma, I said through gritted teeth, but this isn't our legacy. This isn't who we're meant to be. I focused all my will, all the power I could feel coursing through my veins into my hands. The music box began to vibrate, its melody becoming discordant and chaotic. You can't do this, Grandma wailed. You'll destroy everything. No, I said, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. I'm saving everything. With a final surge of energy, I crushed the music box between my palms. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once, and then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the normal sunlit hallway of my grandmother's house. The music box was gone, reduced to nothing more than a fine, glittering dust that slipped through my fingers. As I stood there, catching my breath, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive energy that had filled the house for as long as I could remember was gone, replaced by a sense of peace I'd never known before. It's over, I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. It's really over. As if in response, a warm breeze blew through the hall, carrying with it the scent of summer flowers and the faintest echo of my mother's voice. Well done, Sarah. You're free now. We all are. I smiled through my tears, finally understanding the full weight of what had happened and the new path that lay before me. The legacy of my family, with all its darkness and light, was mine to shape now. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would use it for good. As I made my way downstairs, back to the normal, everyday world, I felt lighter than I had in years. The hunt was over. The curse was broken. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely free. The silence that had fallen over the house was shattered by a bone-chilling screech. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, to see a swirling mass of darkness coalescing in the center of the room. As I watched, horrified and transfixed, the darkness began to take shape, morphing into a familiar figure. Grandma, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The spirit before me flickered and shifted, one moment appearing as the loving grandmother I had known all my life, the next transforming into a monstrous creature of shadows and rage. Her eyes, when they settled on me, burned with an intensity that made me take an involuntary step back. Sarah, Grandma's voice echoed, somehow both warm and terrifying at the same time. My dear sweet Sarah, did you really think it would be that easy to get rid of me? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady as I replied, It's over, Grandma. The music box is destroyed. You have no power here anymore. A laugh that was more of a snarl erupted from the spirit. Oh, you foolish child. The music box was never the source of my power. It was merely a tool, a focus. The true power. Her form solidified, becoming more corporal as she gestured around the room. The true power is all around us, in these walls, in this house, in our very blood. As if responding to her words, the house itself seemed to come alive. The walls began to pulse and writhe, the floorboards creaking and groaning as if in pain. Family portraits that had hung placidly for years suddenly animated, the faces within contorting into screams of agony. Stop it! I cried out, covering my ears to block out the cacophony of tormented voices that filled the air. This isn't real. This isn't you, Grandma. Her laughter echoed around me. Oh, but it is, my dear. This is who I truly am, who we truly are. The power, the darkness. It's our birthright, our legacy. I felt a pressure building in my head, a foreign presence trying to force its way into my mind. Grandma's spirit was no longer content to merely confront me physically. She was attempting to overtake my very soul. No, I gritted out, squeezing my eyes shut and focusing all my will on pushing back against the invasion. I won't let you in. I won't become like you. You can't fight it forever, Sarah. Grandma's voice whispered, seeming to come from inside my own head now. You're tired, scared, alone. Just give in. Let me take care of everything, like I always have. For a moment, I felt my resolve waver. The temptation to give in, to let go of the fear and responsibility, was almost overwhelming. But then I remembered my mother's sacrifice, the truth of what Grandma had done to generations of our family. I am not alone, I declared, my voice growing stronger. I have the strength of all those you've hurt, all those who resisted you, and I will not let you win. With a surge of willpower, I pushed back against Grandma's presence in my mind. I felt her recoil, surprise, and anger radiating from her spectral form. Impossible, she hissed. No one has ever been able to resist me like this. I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze steadily. Maybe that's because no one ever knew the whole truth before. But I do, Grandma. I know what you've done, what you've been doing for generations, and it stops here. With me. Fury contorted Grandma's features, her form shifting rapidly between human and monstrous. You ungrateful little brat, she screeched. After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed. The room around us began to warp and distort, reality itself seeming to bend to Grandma's will. Furniture twisted into grotesque shapes, shadows deepened and writhed with a life of their own. And there, on the mantelpiece, the music box reappeared. You see? Grandma's voice was triumphant. You can't destroy it. You can't destroy me. We are one and the same, Sarah. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. I stared at the music box, my mind racing. If destroying it hadn't worked, what would? How could I possibly end this nightmare? As if in response to my thoughts, I heard my mother's voice, faint but clear. Trust yourself, Sarah. The power is yours to shape. Suddenly I understood. The music box, the house, even Grandma's spirit. They were all manifestations of a power that had been in our family for generations. A power that Grandma had corrupted, but that was ultimately neutral, neither good nor evil on its own. You're right about one thing, Grandma, I said, taking a step towards the mantelpiece. We are connected, but not in the way you think. I reached out towards the music box, feeling the malevolent energy radiating from it. But instead of trying to destroy it, I focused on changing it, reshaping it with my will, my intention. No! Grandma's spirit lunged at me, her form dissolving into a mass of writhing shadows. Don't touch it, you don't know what you're doing. But I did know. For the first time in my life, I truly understood the power that flowed through my veins. As my fingers brushed the surface of the music box, I poured all of my love, my hope, my determination into it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The twisted melody that had haunted me for years began to change, becoming something lighter, purer. The darkness that had filled the room began to recede, replaced by a soft, warm light. What are you doing? Grandma's voice was filled with confusion and fear. Stop this at once. I turned to face her, the transformed music box cradled in my hands. I'm not stopping, Grandma. I'm finishing what should have been done long ago. I'm setting us free. As the new melody filled the air, I saw Grandma's spirit begin to change. The monstrous aspects of her form faded away, leaving only the grandmother I had known and loved. Sarah, she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and sorrow. I remember. Oh God, what have I done? Tears filled my eyes as I stepped towards her. It's okay, Grandma. It wasn't your fault. The power, it corrupted you. But it's over now. Grandma's spirit reached out, her hand hovering just above my cheek. My brave, beautiful girl, Can you ever forgive me? I leaned into her touch, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with physical contact. There's nothing to forgive. You were as much a victim as anyone. As we stood there, bathed in the soft light emanating from the transformed music box, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The house around us slowly returned to normal, the oppressive energy that had filled it for so long finally dissipating. "It's time for me to go," Grandma said softly, "to move on to whatever comes next." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet mix of sadness and relief. "I love you, Grandma. I always will. And I love you, my dear Sarah, more than you'll ever know." Her form began to fade, becoming translucent. "Remember, the power is yours now. Use it wisely. Use it well." With a final loving smile, Grandma's spirit disappeared, leaving me alone in the quiet, sunlit room. I looked down at the music box in my hands, marveling at how something that had once been a source of such fear and pain could now feel so right. As I set it gently back on the mantelpiece, I knew that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The legacy of my family, with all its complexities and power, was mine to shape now, and I was ready for whatever came next. The transformed music box sat on the mantelpiece, its soft melody filling the air with a sense of peace. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that it was truly over, that the nightmare had finally ended. But as I gazed at the object, a creeping unease began to settle in the pit of my stomach. "No," I whispered, realization dawning. "It can't be this easy." As if in response to my words, the melody began to change, slowly at first, then more rapidly. The sweet notes twisted, becoming discordant and jarring. The box itself started to vibrate, shaking so violently that it nearly fell from its perch. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, the peaceful atmosphere giving way to something dark and oppressive. Shadows lengthened and writhed along the walls, and I swore I could hear whispers echoing from every corner of the house. "Grandma?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What's happening?" But there was no response, only the increasingly frantic music pouring from the box. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I had made a terrible mistake. The transformation hadn't freed us. It had only given the malevolent force a new form, a new way to manifest. Without thinking, I lunged forward and grabbed the music box. Its surface burned against my skin, but I held on, driven by desperation and the knowledge that this might be my last chance to end things once and for all. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said through gritted teeth, "but this has to end. Now." With all the strength I could muster, I hurled the music box against the far wall. The impact seemed to happen in slow motion, the ornate object shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, chaos erupted. A tempest of souls burst forth from the broken remnants of the music box, filling the air with wailing and screaming. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of noise and energy. Through the maelstrom, I caught glimpses of faces, some familiar, some strange, all bearing expressions of agony and rage. "Sarah," I heard Grandma's voice call out, barely audible above the din. "What have you done?" I looked up to see her spirit materializing in the center of the room, her form flickering between the grandmother I knew and the monstrous entity she had become. She reached out towards me, her eyes wide with fear and fury. "I'm setting us free," I shouted back, struggling to my feet. "All of us. Even you, Grandma." The house began to shake, plaster raining down from the ceiling as cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. The very foundations seemed to groan in protest as the accumulated power of generations was suddenly unleashed. Grandma's spirit let out an inhuman shriek as she was pulled towards a fiery vortex that had opened up in the floor. "You fool," she howled. "You've doomed us all." I watched, heart pounding, as she was drawn into the swirling abyss. For a moment I saw her face, not the monster, but the woman who had raised me, who had loved me in her own twisted way. Then she was gone, swallowed by the inferno. The vortex snapped shut with a thunderous boom, leaving behind a gaping hole in the floor. But the chaos was far from over. The house was coming apart at the seams, decades of dark magic finally taking their toll. "I have to get out of here," I muttered, dodging a falling beam. I ran for the stairs, my path blocked at every turn by collapsing walls and grasping shadows that seemed determined to hold me back. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of smoke, making it hard to breathe. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a particularly violent tremor shook the house. I lost my footing, tumbling the last few steps and landing hard on the entrance hall floor. "Come on, Sarah," I urged myself, scrambling to my feet. Just a little further. The front door was in sight now, sunlight streaming through its windows, offering a tantalizing glimpse of safety. I pushed myself forward, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the ache in my limbs. Just as my hand closed around the doorknob, I felt the floor give way beneath me. Time seemed to slow as I fell, the world around me dissolving into a chaotic blur of light and shadow. "No!" I cried out, reaching desperately for something, anything to hold on to. Then, darkness. I'm not sure how long I was unconscious. When I finally came to, the first thing I became aware of was the feel of grass beneath my fingers. I opened my eyes slowly, squinting against the bright sunlight. I was lying on the front lawn, the cool morning dew soaking into my clothes. Groaning, I pushed myself up into a sitting position, every muscle in my body protesting the movement. "What?" I began, then trailed off as I took in the scene before me. Where the house had stood just moments ago, or had it been hours, days, there was nothing but an empty lot. No rubble, no sign of the collapse I had just lived through. It was as if the building had never existed at all. "This isn't possible," I whispered, struggling to my feet. I stumbled forward, my legs shaky beneath me. The grass gave way to bare earth as I reached the spot where the front porch should have been. I knelt down, running my fingers through the soil. It was cool and damp, with no trace of the foundation that should have lain beneath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the empty space. "Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" But there was no response, save for the chirping of birds and the distant sound of traffic. The world had gone on, oblivious to the battle that had just taken place. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened, I became aware of something in my pocket. Frowning, I reached in and felt the smooth edge of what seemed to be a photograph. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out. It was the family photo that had hung in the living room for as long as I could remember. Grandma, Mom, and me as a baby, all smiling at the camera. But as I stared at it, the image began to change. The shadows in the background deepened, taking on sinister shapes. Grandma's smile twisted into something cruel and hungry. And there, barely visible behind us, was a figure I had never noticed before. A man with my eyes and Mom's smile. "Dad?" I whispered, tracing the outline of his face with my finger. As if in response to my touch, words began to appear on the back of the photograph, written in a hand I didn't recognize. "The truth lies beneath. The cycle can be broken. Find me." I flipped the photo back over, but the image had returned to normal. Just 3 smiling faces, frozen in time. But now I knew there was more to the story, more to my family's history than I had ever imagined. I looked back at the empty lot, then down at the photograph in my hand. The battle might be over, the house might be gone, but I knew with absolute certainty that my journey was far from finished. "Okay, Dad," I said, tucking the photo safely back into my pocket. "I'll find you, and I'll find the truth." With one last look at the place that had been my home for so long, I turned and walked away. The sun was rising higher in the sky, casting long shadows behind me as I moved forward into an uncertain future. The house was gone, but its secrets remained, and I was determined to uncover them all, no matter where that path might lead me. As I reached the sidewalk, I paused and took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the world. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it. After all, I was Sarah Bennett, last of a long line of witches, and my story was only just beginning. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the veil of sleep, dragging me back to consciousness. I groaned, my hand fumbling across the nightstand to silence the infernal device. The red LED numbers blinked accusingly. 7:15 a.m. Just another Monday in paradise. I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy circles. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting zebra stripes across my rumpled sheets. Everything seemed normal, painfully ordinary. If I'd known what awaited me, I might have burrowed back under the covers and never come out. But ignorance is bliss, right? So I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as my bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. I shuffled towards the bathroom, scratching my stubbled chin and yawning wide enough to crack my jaw. Coffee, I mumbled to myself. Need coffee. I fumbled for the bathroom light switch, squinting as harsh fluorescent light flooded the small space. My eyes, still heavy with sleep, struggled to focus. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I was still dreaming. But as I blinked rapidly, willing my vision to clear, the horror before me only sharpened into terrible focus. There, scrawled across my bathroom mirror in what could only be blood, were 4 words that sent ice water coursing through my veins. I'm coming back. The letters were jagged, dripping, as if whoever or whatever had written them had been in a frenzy. As I completed my circuit of the apartment, confusion mingled with my fear. How had someone gotten in, left that horrifying message, and gotten out without leaving a trace? I returned to the bathroom, plunger still clutched in my white-knuckled grip. The message gleamed mockingly in the fluorescent light. I'm coming back, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Coming back from where? Who are you? As if in response, a memory stirred in the back of my mind. A face, twisted with rage and hatred. A voice promising vengeance. But before I could grasp it fully, the memory slipped away, leaving me with nothing but a vague sense of unease. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I needed to clean this up. I couldn't leave a bloody message on my mirror. What would people think? I grabbed a handful of toilet paper and wet it in the sink. Taking a deep breath, I began to wipe at the gruesome words. To my horror, the blood seemed to resist my efforts. It smeared across the glass, but instead of coming off, it appeared to seep back through, reforming the letters as soon as I'd wiped them away. No, 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 I muttered, scrubbing harder. But it was no use. The message remained, as clear and terrifying as ever. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. They happened in movies, in books, but not to ordinary guys like me in ordinary apartments on ordinary Monday mornings. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the mirror. I spun around, but the bathroom door was still closed, the small room empty save for me. I turned back to the mirror, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a face in the mirror. Not my face, but someone else's. Someone with dark, burning eyes and a smile that promised pain. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only my own pale, terrified reflection staring back at me. I backed out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor, my whole body shaking. This isn't real, I told myself, squeezing my eyes shut. This can't be real. But when I opened my eyes, I was still there, sitting on my hallway floor, a useless plunger lying beside me. And beyond the closed door, I knew that bloody message was waiting, a promise or a threat that I couldn't begin to understand. As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded my mind. Who had done this? How had they gotten in? And most importantly, what did they mean by, "I'm coming back"? I realized with a start that I couldn't stay here. I needed to get out, to get help. But as I struggled to my feet, my legs weak and rubbery, a new, terrifying thought struck me. What if they were still here, waiting for me to leave the relative safety of my apartment. I stood frozen in the hallway, paralyzed by indecision. The morning sun continued to shine through my living room windows, oblivious to the horror that had invaded my life. In the distance, I could hear the city waking up. Car horns, the rumble of the subway, the general hum of life going on as normal. But in here, in my little apartment, nothing would ever be normal again. As I stared at the closed bathroom door, I knew with chilling certainty that my life had changed irrevocably. Whatever was coming back, whatever had left that blood-scrawled warning, it was coming for me. The face emerged from the depths of my memory like a nightmare rising from the murky waters of a forgotten lake. Jake. The name alone sent a chill down my spine, colder than the blood-scrawled message on my bathroom mirror. I slumped onto my couch, my head in my hands, as the memories I'd buried for so long came flooding back. Jake Harrison. My best friend turned worst enemy. How could I have forgotten? It was 5 years ago, but suddenly it felt like yesterday. We were both up for the same promotion at Hartwell Associates. I'd worked my ass off for it, pulling all-nighters, sacrificing weekends, even missing my sister's wedding. Jake had always been the golden boy. Everything came easy to him. I remembered the day of the announcement like it was branded into my brain. Mr. Hartwell had called us both into his office, his face unreadable. "Gentlemen," he'd said, "you've both done exemplary work, but there can only be one regional manager." I held my breath, my heart pounding. Jake stood beside me, confident as always. "Congratulations," Mr. Hartwell said, turning to me. "You've earned this." The shock on Jake's face quickly turned to fury. As we left the office, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "You backstabbing son of a bitch," he hissed. "You think you've won? This isn't over." I tried to shake him off. "Come on, Jake. It was a fair—" His eyes blazed with a hatred I'd never seen before. "I swear to God, I'll make you pay for this. You'll lose everything, just like I have. And when you're at your lowest, when you think it can't get any worse, I'll be there. I'm coming back for you, and you'll wish you'd never been born." Security had escorted him out that day. I'd heard he'd moved out of state shortly after. I'd put it all behind me, or so I thought. But now, the shrill ring of my phone cut through my thoughts like a knife. I jumped, my heart racing. The caller ID showed an unknown number. With shaking hands, I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then, soft at first, but growing louder, the sound of someone breathing. Heavy, ragged breaths like a predator savoring the scent of its prey. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Jake? Is that you?" The breathing intensified, and I swore I could hear a low chuckle underneath. Then, abruptly, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling like I might be sick. It had to be Jake. But how? Why now, after all these years? My eyes darted around the room, suddenly feeling exposed. That's when I noticed something off about the photos on my wall. I approached slowly, squinting at the familiar faces of my family and friends. "No," I whispered. "It's not possible." In every photo, lurking in the background was Jake's face, sometimes partially hidden behind another person, sometimes blurred as if in motion, but always there, always watching. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table. The crash echoed through the apartment, making me jump. "This isn't real," I muttered, running my hands through my hair. "I'm losing my mind. That's it. I'm having some kind of breakdown." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The blood on the mirror, the phone call, and now this. It was all too real, too calculated. I paced the room, trying to think. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That my bathroom mirror was bleeding and my photos had magically changed? That I thought my old coworker was stalking me based on a 5-year-old threat? No, they'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. As the day wore on, I found myself jumping at every sound, peering out the windows, expecting to see Jake's face leering back at me. I couldn't bring myself to enter the bathroom again, using the kitchen sink to splash water on my face instead. Night fell, the darkness creeping in like an unwelcome guest. I sat in my armchair, every light in the apartment blazing, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. My eyes burned from staring at the door, waiting for... what? Jake to come bursting in? The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional car passing outside and the hum of the refrigerator, and then... something else. At first I thought I was imagining it, a faint, scratching sound like fingernails on drywall. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, coming from inside the walls. I rose slowly, the knife trembling in my grip. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be moving, circling the room. "Who's there?" I called out, hating how weak and frightened my voice sounded. "Show yourself." The scratching stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a low, muffled laugh seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. I spun around, brandishing the knife at empty air. "Jake, is that you? What do you want from me?" No response, just more scratching, now coming from the ceiling. I looked up, half expecting to see the plaster crack and Jake's grinning face peer through. But there was nothing. I backed into a corner, sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. The knife clattered from my nerveless fingers. "Please," I whispered, not sure who I was talking to. "Please, just leave me alone." But the scratching continued, an endless, maddening sound that seemed to bore into my very skull. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The noise was inside me now, a constant reminder that I wasn't safe, that Jake was coming back, just like he'd promised. As the long night wore on, I sat there, curled into a ball, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. How was Jake doing this? What did he want? And most terrifyingly, what would happen when he finally revealed himself? The scratching in the walls was a sinister metronome, counting down the moments until Jake's revenge would be complete. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through my windows, I realized with horrifying clarity that this was only the beginning. Whatever Jake had planned, whatever nightmarish scheme he'd concocted over these past 5 years, it was all leading to something worse than blood-scrawled mirrors or doctored photos or phantom sounds in the walls. Jake was coming back, and when he did, I knew my world would never be the same. The first rays of sunlight pierced through my bedroom window, rousing me from a fitful sleep. I blinked, disoriented, my neck stiff from the awkward position I'd maintained all night, huddled in the corner. As consciousness fully returned, so did the memories of the previous day's horrors. The blood on the mirror, the altered photos, the scratching in the walls. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting. That's when I saw it. My bedroom, which I'd barely glanced at since the morning before, was in complete disarray. Drawers hung open, their contents strewn across the floor. My mattress was half off the bed frame, and clothes littered every surface. "What the hell?" I muttered, stumbling through the chaos. I checked my dresser, my nightstand, looking for anything missing. My wallet was still there, as was my watch and the few pieces of jewelry I owned. Nothing seemed to be stolen, just violated. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what this meant. Someone had been here, in my apartment, while I sat paralyzed with fear just a room away. They could have done anything to me, and I would have been helpless to stop it. I checked my phone. 7:30 a.m. I was going to be late for work. Part of me wanted to call in sick, to barricade myself in my apartment. But another part, a stronger part, needed to get out, to be around people, to pretend for a few hours that everything was normal. I dressed quickly, barely glancing in the mirror as I combed my hair. The message was still there, a crimson reminder of my waking nightmare. The drive to work was tense, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Jake's car tailing me. But nothing out of the ordinary happened, and I arrived at Hartwell Associates just 10 minutes late. As I walked into the office, An eerie silence fell. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and heads turned to watch me pass. I could feel their eyes on me, burning with, what? Curiosity? Pity? Knowledge? Morning, everyone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A few murmured responses, but most just stared. As I reached my desk, I overheard two of my co-workers whispering, "Can't believe it's happening again. Shh, he'll hear you." I spun around. "What's happening again? What are you talking about?" They jumped, guilty expressions on their faces. "Nothing," said Tom, a little too quickly. "Just, talking about the quarterly reports." I narrowed my eyes. "Don't lie to me. What's going on?" But they just shook their heads and hurried away, leaving me standing there, confusion and paranoia battling for dominance in my mind. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of sidelong glances and hushed conversations that stopped the moment I came near. I couldn't focus on my work, my mind constantly replaying the events of the past day, trying to make sense of it all. Around noon, a courier arrived with a package for me. I signed for it with trembling hands, noting there was no return address. I opened it carefully, half expecting it to explode. Inside was a single black rose, its petals velvety and perfect. Beneath it lay a small digital timer, its red numbers counting down from 72. My breath caught in my throat. 3 days. Whatever Jake had planned, it was coming to a head in just 3 days. As I stared at the timer, mesmerized by the steadily decreasing numbers, a note fluttered to the floor. With shaking hands, I picked it up and read the typed message. "Time's running out. Are you ready to lose everything?" I crumpled the note in my fist, anger momentarily overtaking fear. "Damn you, Jake," I muttered. "What's your game?" The rest of the workday passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that my colleagues knew something I didn't, that they were all part of some grand conspiracy orchestrated by Jake. By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I was a bundle of frayed nerves. I practically ran to my car, desperate to get home where I could try to make sense of everything. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. About halfway home, on a stretch of road that ran through a wooded area, my car began to sputter. The engine coughed once, twice, and then died completely. I coasted to the shoulder, a string of curses escaping my lips. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This couldn't be a coincidence. None of this was a coincidence. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement in my rearview mirror. I whipped around, my heart pounding. There, just for a second, I could have sworn I saw Jake's face grinning malevolently from the tree line. "Show yourself," I screamed, fumbling with my seatbelt. "I know you're there, Jake." But when I got out of the car, there was no one. Just the wind rustling through the trees and the distant sound of traffic. I stood there, panting, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I didn't know. But as I stared at those glowing red numbers, I realized that in 3 days, for better or worse, this nightmare would reach its climax. The next morning, I awoke to the soft pitter-patter of what I thought was rain. Groggily, I opened my eyes, expecting to see water streaking down my bedroom window. Instead, I witnessed a horror that sent me scrambling out of bed, a scream caught in my throat. The walls were bleeding. Thick, dark rivulets of blood oozed from the ceiling, running down the walls in grotesque patterns. As I watched, frozen in terror, the rivulets began to form words. Tick-tock. "You can't escape. I see you." I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all away. When I opened them again, the walls were pristine, no trace of blood or messages. But as soon as I blinked, the gruesome scene returned. "This isn't real," I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But when I looked again, the blood was still there, forming new messages. "It's all real. Accept your fate." I stumbled out of the bedroom, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The living room was normal, no sign of blood or mysterious messages. The timer on the coffee table read 48:13:22. 2 days left. I needed to get out, to clear my head. Maybe some fresh air would help me think straight. I threw on some clothes and practically ran out of the apartment. The streets were bustling with the usual morning crowd, people hurrying to work or school, wrapped up in their own lives. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief. Here was normality, proof that the world hadn't gone completely mad. But as I walked, snippets of conversation began to reach my ears, and that fragile sense of normalcy shattered. "Poor guy won't know what hit him," a woman in a business suit said to her companion as they passed me. "Did you hear about the countdown?" a teenager asked his friend. "I heard when it hits 0, he's done for." I spun around, staring at them, but they walked on, oblivious to my presence. Had I imagined it? Was I so paranoid that I was reading sinister meanings into innocent conversations? But it kept happening. Every group I passed seemed to be talking about me, about my impending doom. Yet when I tried to confront them, they looked at me blankly, as if they couldn't see me at all. Panic rising, I ducked into a small cafe, hoping to escape the maddening voices. I caught sight of myself in the mirrored wall behind the counter and froze. My reflection was smirking at me. I raised my hand slowly, but my reflection didn't mirror the movement. Instead, it winked and mouthed words I couldn't hear. "Are you okay, sir?" the barista asked, concern etched on her face. I tore my eyes away from the mirror. I'm fine. Just a black coffee, please." As she turned to prepare my order, I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was normal again, mimicking my pale, wide-eyed stare. I took my coffee and found a secluded corner table, my back to the wall. As I sipped the bitter liquid, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was Jake somehow orchestrating all of this, or was I losing my grip on reality? My hand brushed against something in my jacket pocket. Frowning, I pulled out a photograph I didn't remember putting there. My breath caught as I studied the image. It was a picture of Jake and me, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. We were standing in front of a cabin I didn't recognize, surrounded by dense forest. The strange thing was, I had no memory of this photo being taken. Jake and I had never gone on a trip together, had we? I turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Jake's, was a message. "Remember the good times? They're coming to an end. Tick-tock." A chill ran down my spine. I shoved the photo back in my pocket and hurried out of the cafe, no longer able to bear the feeling of eyes watching me from every direction. The next day and a half passed in a blur of paranoia and increasing hallucinations. The bleeding walls became a regular occurrence, the messages growing more threatening and specific. My reflection continued to mock me, sometimes screaming silently, sometimes laughing uproariously at my distress. I stopped answering my phone after the third call that consisted only of my own voice screaming in agony. I couldn't trust anything I saw or heard anymore. As the timer ticked down to its final hours, I found myself huddled in my apartment, all the lights on, jumping at every sound. The photo of Jake and me lay on the coffee table next to the timer, a constant reminder of the threat looming over me. With just an hour left, I finally worked up the courage to call the police. But as the phone rang, I heard a click, and then Jake's voice filled the line. Now, he said, his tone mockingly gentle. "We can't have you spoiling the surprise, can we? It's almost time. Are you ready?" "Ready for what?" I shouted into the phone. "What have you done, Jake? What's going to happen?" But the line was already dead. As the final minutes ticked away, I paced my apartment, alternating between rage and terror. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away as possible, but another part knew it was pointless. Whatever Jake had planned, there was no escaping it. The timer hit 10, and I braced myself, though for what, I had no idea. 05, 3, For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a giant switch being thrown, every light in my apartment went out. I rushed to the window and saw darkness spreading across the city like a wave, block by block, until the entire skyline was plunged into blackness. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, until it felt like 100 Jakes were surrounding me, closing in. Panic overwhelmed me. I lunged for where I thought the door should be, my hands scrabbling against the wall. Finally, I found the doorknob and wrenched it open, stumbling out into the hallway. But the hallway wasn't there anymore. Instead, I found myself on a street I didn't recognize. The buildings loomed impossibly tall, their windows dark and lifeless. The road stretched out before me, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. "What the hell?" I muttered, spinning around. My apartment building had vanished, replaced by more of this nightmare cityscape. The whispers followed me, carried on a wind that shouldn't exist in this enclosed space. "Michael, you can't escape. Michael." I started running, my feet pounding against the pavement. Each turn led to another unfamiliar street, each alley a dead end. The city had become a labyrinth, and I was the rat trapped within it. As I ran, the shadows began to move. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of my panicked mind. But then I saw them clearly, dark shapes peeling themselves from the walls, flowing across the ground like living ink. They chased me, their formless bodies stretching out, trying to ensnare my feet. I could hear them now, a sound like rustling paper mixed with soft, hungry growls. "This isn't real," I gasped as I ran. "It can't be real." But the burning in my lungs, the ache in my legs, it all felt real enough. The shadows were gaining on me, their cold touch brushing against my heels. Up ahead, I saw a building that stood out from the rest, a church, its spire reaching up into the starless sky. Somehow I knew it was my only hope. I put on a burst of speed, racing up the steps. The heavy wooden doors opened at my touch, and I threw myself inside, slamming them shut behind me. The interior of the church was dimly lit by flickering candles. Rows of pews led up to an altar, and along the walls stood statues of saints, their stone faces serene in the gloom. I leaned against the doors, panting, listening for any sign that the shadows had followed me. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, a scraping sound made me turn around. My blood ran cold as I saw one of the statues slowly rotating, its blank eyes fixing on me. Another moved, then another, until every statue in the church was facing me, their expressions no longer peaceful, but accusatory. "No," I whispered. "Please, no." The statues began to speak, their stone lips moving in impossible ways. Each one had Jake's voice. "You can't hide from your guilt, Michael," they said in unison. "You can't hide from me." "I haven't done anything," I shouted, backing away. "Leave me alone." But the statues were advancing now, stepping down from their pedestals with grating, stony movements. Had I really let my imagination run so wild? Had my fear of Jake's old threat driven me to some kind of psychological break? I went to the kitchen to make coffee, trying to shake off the lingering unease. As the coffee brewed, I noticed something on the counter that made my blood run cold. It was a single black rose petal. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It felt real, velvety between my fingers. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. The petal was still there. "Okay," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "Okay. Think this through, Michael. It doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe you brought it in on your shoe or something." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I hadn't seen any roses, let alone black ones, in days. I spent the rest of the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, jumping at every sound, scrutinizing every shadow. But nothing out of the ordinary happened. By the time I had to leave for work, I had almost convinced myself that the rose petal was just a coincidence. As I locked my apartment door, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, was shuffling past with her little dog. "Good morning, Mrs. K," I said, trying to sound normal. She looked at me strangely. "Are you feeling better, dear? You gave us all quite a scare last night." I froze. "Last night? What do you mean?" "Oh, all that screaming and running around. And then when the police came, well, I'm just glad to see you're up and about." My mind reeled. "Police? Mrs. Kowalski, I don't remember any of that." She patted my arm sympathetically. "Don't you worry about it, dear. We all have our bad nights sometimes. Just maybe keep it down a bit next time, hmm?" She continued down the hall, leaving me standing there, my certainty crumbling around me. It hadn't been a dream, at least not all of it. But how much was real? How much had actually happened? As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. My hand shook as I opened it. "Sweet dreams, Michael. Don't worry. The real fun is just beginning. Jay." I looked up, scanning the street, the windows of nearby buildings. Was he watching me right now? Had he always been watching? One thing was clear. This nightmare was far from over. The hunt had begun, and I was the prey. As I got into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow might come alive, that every stranger on the street might be Jake in disguise. The game was on, and I had no idea how to play, let alone win. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to find a way to end this, to confront Jake once and for all. Because if I didn't, I feared I might lose not just the game, but my very grip on reality. With a deep breath, I started the car and pulled out into traffic, keenly aware that every turn might lead me back into Jake's labyrinth. The hunt had begun, and I was running out of safe places to hide. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the paranoia, the feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. It was all too much. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, someone I could trust. That's why I called Sarah, my best friend since college. We met at our favorite coffee shop, a quiet little place where we'd spent countless hours studying and gossiping over the years. As soon as I saw her concerned face, the words started pouring out of me. I told her everything. The blood on the mirror, the altered photos, the nightmarish chase through the city that may or may not have been real. Sarah listened patiently, her brow furrowing more with each passing minute. When I finally finished, out of breath and on the verge of tears, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Michael," she said gently, "I think you might be having some kind of breakdown." I pulled my hand away, stung. "What?" "No, Sarah, you don't understand. This is real. Jake is back and he's—" "Jake moved away years ago," she interrupted. "You haven't seen or heard from him since. Don't you think it's possible that all of this is, well, in your head?" I stared at her, disbelief and betrayal warring inside me. "You think I'm crazy?" She sighed. "I think you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional, I mean." "I'm talking to you," I snapped, louder than I intended. A few other patrons glanced our way. Sarah lowered her voice. "Michael, please. I'm worried about you. These things you're describing, they're not possible. Bleeding walls, living shadows. You have to see how this sounds." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I thought you of all people would believe me. I guess I was wrong." As I stormed out of the coffee shop, I heard Sarah calling after me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't bear to see the pity and concern in her eyes anymore. I wandered the streets aimlessly, my mind churning. Was Sarah right? Was I losing my mind? But no. The rose petal had been real. The text message from Jake had been real. Hadn't they? Lost in thought, I almost walked right into a man standing on the sidewalk. I mumbled an apology and tried to move past him, but he grabbed my arm. "Michael Thompson?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I tensed, ready to run. "Who wants to know?" The man glanced around nervously. "Someone who can help you. Someone who knows about Jake." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you know about Jake?" "Not here," he said, releasing my arm. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Pier 17 in an hour. Come alone." Before I could respond, he melted into the crowd, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. An hour later, against my better judgment, I found myself approaching the dilapidated warehouse. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the promise of answers was too tempting to resist. The stranger was waiting for me inside, his face half hidden in shadow. I was starting to think you wouldn't come. Start talking, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you know about Jake? He stepped forward and I got my first good look at him. He was older than I expected, with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face. My name is Alan. I used to work for Hartwell Associates just like you and Jake. I don't remember you, I said, frowning. Alan smiled grimly. You wouldn't. I left long before you joined, but I remember Jake, and I know what he's capable of. Over the next hour, Alan spun a tale that seemed too fantastical to be true. He claimed that Jake had always been different, brilliant, but unstable, obsessed with the idea of revenge against those he felt had wronged him. When he left the company, Alan said, he didn't just move away. He went underground, gathering resources, making connections. He's been planning this for years, Michael, and he's not alone. What do you mean? I asked, a chill running down my spine. Alan leaned in close. There's a conspiracy. People in the company, people you work with every day. Some of them are working with Jake, helping him. My mind reeled. The strange behavior of my colleagues, the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Suddenly, it all made a twisted kind of sense. But why? I demanded. Why would they help him? Alan shook his head. Money, power, fear. Who knows? The point is, you can't trust anyone at Hartwell. No one. As the implications of his words sank in, a new wave of paranoia washed over me. If what Alan was saying was true, I was surrounded by enemies, people who had been watching me, reporting back to Jake, maybe even participating in his sick games. What can I do? I asked, hating how helpless I sounded. Alan reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. This contains evidence, emails, financial records, everything I've managed to gather about Jake's network. Take it to the police, it's your only chance. I took the flash drive, my hand shaking slightly. Thank you. I don't know how to... My words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass. Something crashed through the warehouse window, landing between us with a metallic clank. It took me a moment to recognize it. A grenade. Run! Alan shouted, shoving me towards the exit. The explosion rocked the warehouse, throwing me off my feet. My ears rang, and smoke filled the air. Through the haze, I saw Alan lying motionless on the ground. Alan! I crawled towards him, coughing. But as I reached him, I knew it was too late. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and there was a large piece of shrapnel embedded in his chest. And there, carved into his forehead, was a message that made my blood run cold. No one can help you now. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the flash drive, and ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped, I found myself in an unfamiliar part of the city, surrounded by indifferent strangers going about their day. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. Alan was dead, killed because he tried to help me. And the conspirators, whoever they were, knew I had the flash drive. I looked down at the small device in my hand. It held the key to unraveling this whole nightmare, if I could trust that what Alan had told me was true. But could I? After everything that had happened, after what I'd seen and experienced, how could I trust anyone or anything? The image of Alan's lifeless body, the cruel message carved into his skin, flashed through my mind. Jake's words echoed in my ears. No one can help you now. As I stood there, lost and alone in a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile, a terrible realization dawned on me. I couldn't trust my coworkers. I couldn't trust my friends. I couldn't even trust my own senses or memories anymore. In this twisted game that Jake had constructed, there was only one person I could rely on. Myself. And even that was starting to feel like a shaky proposition. I pocketed the flash drive and started walking, no particular destination in mind. Every face I passed was a potential enemy, every shadow a possible hiding place for Jake or his accomplices. The hunt was intensifying, and I was running out of places to hide, people to turn to. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, I made a silent vow. I would get to the bottom of this, expose Jake's conspiracy, and end this nightmare once and for all. Because if I didn't, I feared I might lose not just my life, but my very sanity. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. But first, I needed a plan, and a safe place to examine the contents of that flash drive. As I hailed a taxi giving the address of a cheap motel across town, I couldn't shake the feeling that every move I made was being watched, analyzed, anticipated. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The dingy motel room felt like a sanctuary after days of paranoia and fear. I sat on the edge of the bed, the flash drive Alan had given me clutched in my trembling hands. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever revelations it might contain. Just as I was about to plug it into my laptop, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. "Room service," a familiar voice called out. I froze. It couldn't be. But I knew that voice. I'd heard it in my nightmares for days. Slowly, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. There, standing in the hallway with a room service cart, was Jake. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Come on, Michael. Open up, we have so much to talk about." My hand hovered over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to barricade the door, to hide under the bed like a child. But another part, a part I barely recognized, was tired of running. I opened the door. Jake stood there, looking exactly as I remembered him. His easy smile, his piercing eyes. It was all the same. He pushed the cart into the room, closing the door behind him. "Long time no see, old friend," he said, as if we were meeting for drinks after work. "You're not real," I whispered. "You can't be here." Jake laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Oh, I'm very real, Michael. The question is, are you?" He gestured to the window, and I followed his gaze. Outside, people were walking by, going about their lives as if nothing was amiss, as if there wasn't a ghost from my past standing in my hotel room. "They can't see me," Jake said, answering my unspoken question. "Only you can. Isn't that special?" I backed away, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "What do you want from me, Jake? Why are you doing this?" His smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You know why. You took everything from me, Michael. My job, my future, my sanity. Now I'm going to take everything from you." As he spoke, the room around us began to change. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting. The floor rippled like water. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the distortions only intensified. "What's happening?" I gasped. Jake's grin was back, wider and more malevolent than ever. "Welcome to my world, Michael. A world where reality bends to my will. A world where your worst nightmares come to life." Suddenly, we weren't in the hotel room anymore. We were standing in the office at Hartwell Associates the day Jake had been passed over for the promotion. "Remember this day?" Jake's voice echoed around me. "The day you stabbed me in the back?" I saw myself, 5 years younger, shaking hands with Mr. Hartwell. I saw Jake's face contort with rage. "It wasn't like that," I protested. "I worked hard for that promotion. I earned it." The scene shifted again. We were in a dark alley, rain pouring down around us. Jake was on his knees begging. "Please, Michael." The past Jake pleaded. "I need this job. I've got debts. People will get hurt if I can't pay." I remembered this conversation. It had happened a week after Jake was fired. I had ignored his pleas, told him to move on. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I didn't understand." Present-day Jake circled me, his eyes gleaming. No, you didn't. But you're going to understand now. With each step he took, the city around us warped and changed. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes. Streets folded in on themselves like origami. And everywhere I looked, I saw faces, accusing, mocking, pitying. Stop this, I begged. Please, Jake. I'm sorry for what happened, but this has to end. He laughed, the sound echoing off the twisted landscape. End? Oh no, Michael. We're just getting started. As he spoke, I felt something stirring within me, a power I'd never felt before, raw and electric. Without thinking, I raised my hand and a wave of energy burst forth, pushing Jake back. He stumbled, surprise flashing across his face. Well, looks like you've got some fight in you after all. The city shifted again, reforming into a gladiatorial arena. Spectators filled the stands, their faces a blur of emotion, fear, excitement, bloodlust. Let's see what you can do, Jake snarled, lunging at me. I dodged, my body moving with a speed and grace I'd never possessed before. As we fought, the arena changed with each blow. One moment we were on a narrow bridge over a bottomless chasm, the next on top of a skyscraper, then in a dense jungle. With each shift, I felt my newfound power growing stronger. I could feel the fabric of this twisted reality, could sense how to bend it to my will. This isn't real, I said, more to myself than to Jake. None of this is real. Oh, it's real enough, Jake growled, throwing a punch that I barely avoided. Real enough to destroy you. But I was starting to understand. This world, this confrontation, it was all happening in our minds. And in the mind, belief was everything. I closed my eyes, concentrating hard. When I opened them, we were back in the hotel room. Jake looked around, confusion and anger warring on his face. No, he snarled. You can't do this. This is my world. Not anymore, I said, feeling a calm certainty settle over me. I don't know how you did all this, Jake. I don't know if you have some kind of power, or if I'm just losing my mind. But I do know one thing. I'm not afraid of you anymore. As I spoke, Jake's form began to waver, like a mirage in the desert. He lunged at me one last time, his face a mask of fury and desperation. But as his hands reached for my throat, they passed right through me. This isn't over, he hissed, his voice fading. You can't escape me, Michael. I'll always be here, in the darkest corners of your mind. And then, like smoke in the wind, he was gone. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. Had I won? Was it really over? A sharp pain in my arm made me look down. There was an IV inserted into my vein. Confused, I looked around, really seeing my surroundings for the first time. I wasn't in a hotel room. I was in a hospital bed. The walls were stark white, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside me. Mr. Thompson, a gentle voice said. A nurse was standing beside my bed, a concerned look on her face. Are you with us? Where am I? I croaked, my throat dry. You're in the psychiatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital, she explained softly. You've been here for 3 days. Do you remember what happened? I shook my head, my mind reeling. Had it all been a delusion? The blood on the mirror, the chase through the city, the confrontation with Jake, had none of it been real? You had a severe psychotic episode at your workplace, the nurse continued. You were talking about someone named Jake, about conspiracies and people trying to hurt you. We had to sedate you. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. So Sarah had been right. I was losing my mind. But as I lay there, trying to separate reality from delusion, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a troubling thought. What if this was just another layer of Jake's game? What if the hospital, the nurse, all of it was just another fabrication? I opened my eyes, looking around the room with newfound suspicion. Was that a flicker of movement in the corner? Did the shadows just shift unnaturally? Is everything all right, Mr. Thompson? The nurse asked, noticing my agitation. I forced a smile. Yes, everything's fine. I'm just tired. But as she nodded and left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Jake's last words echoed in my mind. You can't escape me, Michael. I'll always be here, in the darkest corners of your mind. Real or not, sane or insane, one thing was certain. The game was far from over. The stark white walls of the psychiatric ward seemed to close in around me as I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing. It had been a week since I'd woken up here, and with each passing day my grip on reality felt more tenuous. Dr. Simmons, the lead psychiatrist, entered the room with his usual calm demeanor. Good morning, Michael. How are we feeling today? I eyed him warily. The same as yesterday, Doctor. Confused, frustrated, wondering if I'm losing my mind. He nodded sympathetically and took a seat across from me. I understand. Let's talk about Jake again, shall we? I sighed, bracing myself for another round of what felt like gaslighting. What's the point? You're just going to tell me he doesn't exist. Michael. Dr. Simmons leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. We've been over this. We've checked every record, contacted your former employers, even reached out to your college. There's no evidence that anyone named Jake ever worked with you or went to school with you. I stood up, pacing the small room. But I remember him. I remember conversations, projects we worked on together. How can all of that be in my head? Dr. Simmons watched me carefully. The mind is capable of creating incredibly detailed false memories, especially under stress. Your break from reality seems to have centered around this Jake character, perhaps as a way for your psyche to process unresolved guilt or anxiety. I was about to argue when something caught my eye through the window of my room. A patient was being escorted down the hall, and for a moment I could have sworn it was Sarah, my best friend. But that was impossible. Sarah wasn't mentally ill. Michael? Dr. Simmons's voice snapped me back to attention. What is it? I shook my head, trying to clear it. Nothing. I just thought I saw someone I knew. The doctor made a note on his clipboard. That's not uncommon. Patients often project familiar faces onto strangers. It's part of the adjustment process. As he spoke, I noticed something strange happening to the walls of my room. For a brief moment, they seemed to shimmer and transform into the office at Hartwell Associates. I blinked hard, and the illusion vanished. Are you all right? Dr. Simmons asked, noticing my distress. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Was I hallucinating again? Or was this another layer of Jake's game? I think that's enough for today, the doctor said, standing up. Try to rest, Michael. Remember, you're safe here. As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I spent the rest of the day watching the other patients, and with growing unease, I realized that many of them looked familiar. There was a man who could have been my old college roommate, a woman who resembled my first girlfriend, and even someone who looked disturbingly like Mr. Hartwell himself. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the room began to change again. The sterile hospital walls melted away, replaced by the familiar surroundings of my childhood bedroom. I sat up, heart pounding, as objects from my past materialized around me. My old baseball trophies, posters of bands I'd loved as a teenager, even the battered stuffed animal I'd kept hidden from my friends. This isn't real, I whispered to myself, squeezing my eyes shut. It's all in your head, Michael. Get a grip. But when I opened my eyes, the room remained transformed. And there, sitting at my old desk, was a figure I recognized all too well. Hello, Michael, Jake said, swiveling in the chair to face me. Miss me? I scrambled out of bed, backing away. You're not here. You're not real. Jake laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. Oh, I'm as real as you are. Maybe more so. Tell me, Michael, have you figured it out yet? Figured what out? I demanded, my back pressed against the wall. Jake stood up, his form seeming to flicker and distort. Who you really are, what you really are. As he spoke, the room began to spin, fragments of memories flashing before my eyes. Jake and I as children, playing together. Jake and I in college, inseparable. Jake and I at Hartwell Associates, competing for the same promotion. "Stop it," I shouted, clutching my head. "Get out of my mind." Jake's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But I am your mind, Michael. I am you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. All this time, the chase, the mind games, the shifting realities, it had all been a battle with myself. Jake wasn't some external tormentor. He was a part of me, a fractured piece of my own psyche. As this truth settled over me, the room stabilized, returning to its hospital state. I found myself on the floor, gasping for breath. "No," I muttered, struggling to my feet. "No, this can't be right." But even as I denied it, I knew it was true. The doctors hadn't been lying or part of some conspiracy. They'd been trying to help me face a truth I wasn't ready to accept. I wasn't Michael Thompson, the successful businessman being tormented by a vengeful former colleague. I was Jake Donovan, a man who had suffered a psychotic break after losing a crucial promotion, creating an alternate personality to cope with my failure and guilt. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in what felt like ages, my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. Moving quietly, I made my way to the door of my room. The night nurse was distracted, chatting with an orderly. I slipped past them, my heart pounding as I navigated the dimly lit corridors. I found the fire exit and pushed it open, wincing at the alarm that immediately began to blare. But I didn't stop. I ran out into the cool night air, away from the hospital and its attempts to piece my fractured mind back together. Because I understood now that the real threat wasn't Jake or some external conspiracy. The real threat was the war raging inside my own mind, and I couldn't fight that battle confined to a hospital bed, drowning in medications that dulled my senses. As I ran through the darkened streets, my hospital gown flapping around my legs, I felt more alive than I had in weeks. The city around me seemed to pulse with energy, as if reflecting the chaos in my mind. "You can't run from me," Jake's voice whispered on the wind. "I'm always with you." "I know," I said aloud, not breaking my stride. "But I'm not running from you anymore. I'm running towards the truth." I didn't know where I was going or what I would do when I got there, but I knew that somewhere out there in the twisted landscape of my own psyche lay the key to understanding who I really was. Jake, Michael, or someone else entirely. The hunt was on once again, but this time I was both the hunter and the hunted, chasing down the scattered pieces of my own identity. And I wouldn't stop until I put them back together, no matter how painful or terrifying the truth might be. As the first light of dawn began to break over the city, I disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the world of locked wards and sympathetic doctors. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the promise of self-discovery. The game had changed, but it was far from over. In fact, the real challenge was only just beginning. The city pulsed with an eerie energy as I raced through its streets, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The hospital gown fluttered behind me like a tattered flag, a reminder of the fragile grip on reality I'd left behind. Time seemed to warp and stretch, the urgency of my mission battling against the surreal landscape of my fractured mind. I skidded to a halt at a busy intersection, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The traffic lights flickered ominously, cycling through their colors at an impossible speed. Pedestrians moved in jerky, time-lapse motions, their faces blurring into indistinct smears. "Tick-tock, Michael," Jake's voice whispered in my ear, though I knew he wasn't really there. Or should I say, "Jake, time's running out." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus. "What's your endgame here? What are you planning?" A chuckle echoed through my mind. "You know exactly what I'm planning. After all, we're the same person, aren't we?" The realization hit me like a physical blow. Of course, the promotion, the resentment, the desire for revenge. It had all been building to this moment. I closed my eyes, concentrating hard, and suddenly I could see it all laid out before me like a blueprint. Hartwell Associates, the place where it all began. Where we, had been passed over, humiliated, cast aside. And now, the target of an elaborate plan for revenge. I opened my eyes, my purpose clear. I had to get to the office building before it was too late. As I ran, the city around me continued to shift and change. One moment I was sprinting down a familiar street, the next navigating a labyrinth of twisted alleys that couldn't possibly exist. Reality and fantasy blended seamlessly, making it impossible to tell what was real and what was a product of my disturbed mind. I passed a shop window and caught a glimpse of my reflection. For a split second, I saw Jake staring back at me, his eyes wild with a mixture of triumph and despair. I stumbled, nearly losing my footing, but forced myself to keep moving. "You can't stop this," Jake's voice taunted. "It's already in motion, years in the making, every detail meticulously planned." "Shut up," I growled, pushing myself harder. "I won't let us, do this." As I rounded a corner, I found myself face to face with Sarah. She stood there, looking exactly as she had the last time I'd seen her in the coffee shop, concern etched across her features. "Michael," she said softly, "what are you doing?" I hesitated, uncertain. Was she real? Or another hallucination? "Sarah," I panted, "I need your help. We're going to do something terrible. We have to stop it." She shook her head sadly. "Oh, Michael, there is no we. There's only you. You need to accept that." As she spoke, her form began to waver and distort. I blinked, and suddenly it wasn't Sarah standing before me, but Mr. Hartwell, my old boss. "You were never good enough," he sneered. "That's why you didn't get the promotion. That's why you're running through the streets in a hospital gown, chasing shadows." I stumbled backward, my head spinning. "No, you're wrong. I am good enough. I am." But who was I? Michael? Jake? Someone else entirely? I turned and ran, leaving the shifting apparition behind. The streets blurred around me as I pushed myself to the limit, driven by a desperate need to reach Hartwell Associates before it was too late. Finally, I saw it looming ahead, the gleaming glass tower where I'd once worked, where my life had taken its fateful turn. As I approached, I saw that the entrance was unguarded, the lobby eerily empty. I burst through the doors, my bare feet squeaking on the polished marble floor. The elevator doors opened as if expecting me, and I threw myself inside, jabbing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. My hair was wild, my eyes wide and haunted. The hospital gown hung off my thin frame, a stark reminder of how far I'd fallen. "Look at yourself," Jake's voice sneered. "Pathetic. Weak. Is it any wonder they chose someone else over you?" I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voice. "I'm not weak," I whispered. "I'm here, aren't I? I'm trying to stop this." The elevator dinged, and I opened my eyes to find myself not in the familiar executive suite, but in a dark, cavernous space that seemed to stretch on forever. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, taking on monstrous shapes before melting away. "Welcome to the heart of darkness," Jake's voice echoed around me. "Your darkness. Our darkness." I stepped forward cautiously, my eyes straining to make sense of my surroundings. As I moved deeper into the space, scenes from my past began to materialize around me like three-dimensional projections. There I was, a child, cowering as my father raged in a drunken stupor. There I was again, a teenager, lying to my best friend to steal away his girlfriend. And there, in vivid detail, was the moment I sabotaged my co-worker's presentation, ensuring that I would get the promotion instead of him. "No," I whispered, horrified. "That's not... I didn't..." But I had. These weren't false memories or hallucinations. They were the truths I'd buried deep, the parts of myself I'd tried to forget or deny. You see now, don't you? Jake's voice was almost gentle. The real reason for all of this. It was never about revenge against others. It was about punishing ourselves for what we've done. As the realization washed over me, the shadowy space began to transform. Walls materialized, forming a familiar office. Mr. Hartwell's office. And there, sitting behind the desk, was Jake, or rather another version of myself. He looked up as I approached, a sad smile on his face. "Hello, Michael. Or should I call you Jake? It doesn't really matter anymore, does it?" I sank into the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted. What is all this? What are we doing here? I sighed heavily. We're here to face the truth, to make a choice that will change everything. With a wave of his hand, a complex device appeared on the desk between us. It looked like a mess of wires and explosives, with a digital display counting down. "What is that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The culmination of our plan," he replied. "Set to detonate in exactly 1 hour. It will destroy this building and everyone in it. All the people who wronged us, who failed to see our potential, but more importantly, it will destroy us. The ultimate act of self-punishment." I stared at the device, my mind reeling. "But innocent people will die." He nodded grimly. "Yes, just like the innocent people we've hurt throughout our life. Fitting, isn't it?" I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "No, I won't let this happen. We can't do this." "We already have," he said softly. "The only question now is whether you have the courage to stop it." I looked at him, at myself, and saw the pain, the guilt, the self-loathing that had driven us to this point. And I understood that this was the real battle I'd been fighting all along, not against some external enemy, but against the darkest parts of my own psyche. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. "You know what you have to do. Acknowledge the truth. Accept who you are. All of it, the good and the bad. Only then can you truly choose who you want to be." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. All the memories I'd suppressed, all the lies I'd told myself, all the pain I'd caused, I let it all wash over me. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't try to stop them. When I opened my eyes, I was alone in the office. The device still sat on the desk, its countdown now showing less than 5 minutes. I knew what I had to do. With shaking hands, I reached for the wires, preparing to disarm the bomb and finally face the consequences of my actions. But as my fingers touched the cool metal, I hesitated. Was I really ready to give up this elaborate fantasy? To return to a world where I'd have to confront the reality of who I was and what I'd done? Or was it easier to let the countdown reach 0, to lose myself completely in the fractured landscape of my own mind? The choice before me was terrible, but it was mine to make. And as the seconds ticked away, I knew that my decision would alter not just my fate, but the fate of everyone who had ever been touched by the twisted path that had led me to this moment. With a deep breath, I made my choice. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my apartment, standing before the bathroom mirror. The familiar sight of dried blood spelling out, "I'm coming back," greeted me. But this time, it didn't fill me with dread. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm, as if I'd finally reached the end of a long and twisted journey. As I stared at my reflection, I noticed something odd. It wasn't just my face looking back at me. Overlaid on my features were glimpses of all the versions of myself I'd encountered throughout this nightmarish experience. I saw the successful businessman I thought I was, the paranoid fugitive I'd become, the broken patient in the psychiatric ward, and countless other fragments of identity. "We're all here," I whispered, touching the cool glass. "We've always been here." As if in response, the reflections began to shift and merge, flowing into one another like watercolors bleeding on canvas. I watched, transfixed, as the myriad versions of myself coalesced into two distinct images, Michael and Jake, standing side by side in the mirror. "It's time," Jake said, his voice echoing both in my mind and in the small bathroom. I nodded, understanding what needed to happen next. We were never truly separate, were we? Michael shook his head. Two sides of the same coin. The person we thought we were, and the person we were afraid to be. As they spoke, I felt a tugging sensation in my chest, as if some fundamental part of me was being pulled in two directions at once. The bathroom began to warp and distort around me, the walls bending at impossible angles. "What's happening?" I gasped, struggling to maintain my balance as the floor beneath me rippled like water. "We're coming full circle," Jake explained, his form in the mirror beginning to blur. "The cycle is completing itself." I watched in awe as Jake and Michael's reflections moved closer together, their edges softening and merging. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, like watching the birth of a star or the death of a universe. "Will it hurt?" I asked, my voice sounding small and childlike. Michael smiled gently. "Only as much as growth always does." As their reflections merged completely, I felt a sudden, searing pain in my head. Images flashed before my eyes in rapid succession. The bloody mirror, the chase through the twisted city, the confrontations with Jake, the revelations in the psychiatric ward, the race to stop the bomb. But now I saw them from all perspectives at once. Michael's fear, Jake's anger, and the confused tumult of emotions from every version of myself in between. I clutched my head, falling to my knees as the bathroom continued to distort around me. The walls pulsed with an otherworldly light, and I could hear whispers echoing from every direction. "I'm coming back," the voices said, overlapping and multiplying until they became a deafening roar. "I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm coming back." And suddenly, with crystal clarity, I understood the true meaning of those words. It wasn't Jake coming back to torment me. It wasn't some external threat or long-buried memory resurfacing. It was me, the real me, the whole me, coming back to myself after being fractured for so long. As this realization washed over me, I felt the pain in my head subside, replaced by a warm, pulsing energy that seemed to flow through my entire body. I looked up at the mirror, and for the first time, I saw myself. Not Michael, not Jake, but the complete, integrated person I truly was. "Hello," I said to my reflection, my voice steady and sure. "It's good to finally meet you." The reflection smiled back, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. But even as I reveled in this newfound wholeness, I became aware of a subtle shift in the world around me. The bathroom was fading, its edges blurring and dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The mirror remained, but beyond it, I could see only an inky blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. "What's happening now?" I asked, surprised to find that I wasn't afraid. My reflection shrugged. "The world we created is collapsing. This particular journey is coming to an end." I nodded, understanding on a deep level. "But it's not really the end, is it?" "No," my reflection agreed. "It's just another turn of the wheel." As the last remnants of the bathroom faded away, leaving me standing in a void with only the mirror for company, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sad for the conclusion of this chapter, but excited for whatever might come next. "Will I remember any of this?" I asked. My reflection smiled enigmatically. "Does it matter? The lessons will remain, even if the details fade." I considered this, turning the idea over in my mind. "I suppose you're right, but I hope I don't have to go through all of that again just to learn the same things." "Who knows?" my reflection said with a chuckle. "Maybe next time, you'll be the one doing the teaching." As we shared a laugh, I noticed that the mirror was starting to fade as well, its edges becoming indistinct against the surrounding darkness. "I guess this is goodbye then," I said, feeling a pang of melancholy. My reflection nodded. "For now. But remember, I'm always here. We're always here. All you have to do is look." With those final words, the mirror vanished completely, leaving me alone in the endless void. For a moment, I felt a flicker of panic, wondering what would happen next. But then I reminded myself that I was whole now, integrated and strong. Whatever came next, I could face it. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. As I exhaled, I felt the darkness around me shift, taking on substance and form. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself standing in a familiar place, the hallway outside my apartment. Everything looked exactly as it had at the beginning of this strange journey. The worn carpet beneath my feet, the flickering fluorescent light overhead, the chipped paint on my apartment door. It was all so normal, so mundane, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined everything that had happened. But then I felt it. A warm, pulsing energy in my chest. A reminder of the integration I had experienced. I was still whole, still complete. The journey had been real, even if its trappings had faded away. I reached for my keys, ready to enter my apartment and begin this new chapter of my life. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard it. A sound that sent a shiver of déjà vu down my spine. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps on the door coming from inside the apartment. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. A part of me wanted to run, to flee from whatever new nightmare might be waiting on the other side of that door. But a larger part, the integrated whole part of myself, knew that running was no longer an option. Whatever was waiting for me in there, whatever new journey or challenge lay ahead, I had to face it. Because that's what growth was all about. Facing the unknown, confronting our fears, and emerging stronger on the other side. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. As I stepped across the threshold, I felt a familiar sensation, as if reality was shifting and reforming around me. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what shape it would take this time. "Hello?" I called out, my voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in my gut. "Is anyone there?" As the door swung shut behind me with a soft click, I knew that the cycle was beginning again. But this time I was ready. This time I was whole. Whatever came next, whatever strange turns this new journey might take, I would face it as my true, integrated self. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally break the cycle for good. As the apartment around me began to warp and change, taking on new and impossible forms, I smiled. After all, isn't that what life is all about? Constant change, constant growth, always coming full circle only to begin again? With that thought in mind, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready for whatever adventures or nightmares awaited me. The cycle had begun anew, but this time, I was in control, and that made all the difference.